I stood in the rain clutching the deed to Waterfall Estate, watching Nathan's Tesla pull into the auction house parking lot. The look on his face when he realized I was the anonymous buyer who'd snatched his dream home was worth every penny of my grandmother's inheritance. 15 years of marriage dissolved for his college flame. Yet here I was holding the keys to the future he insisted I didn't deserve. That rainy Portland morning made every sleepless night worthwhile. I remember exactly when I first noticed. Something was off. It was a drizzly Thursday in March, typical Portland weather that normally wouldn't register as memorable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd spent the afternoon at a community workshop teaching watercolor, techniques to seniors, volunteer work that Nathan had increasingly described as cute, but not exactly consequential. I came home earlier than expected, the scent of fresh rain still clinging to my jacket as I shook out my umbrella in the entryway of our Pearl District townhouse. The silence struck me immediately. Nathan was always noisy, conference calls on speaker, podcasts blaring from his home office, the clacking of his mechanical keyboard as he fired off emails to investors. Our home typically vibrated with his energy, his presence, his ambitions. But that afternoon, there was only stillness, broken occasionally by the soft murmur of a hushed conversation drifting down from upstairs. "Nathan?" I called, hanging. My jacket on the minimalist coat rack he'd insisted on buying during our last home refresh. It was sleek, architectural, and perpetually unstable, much like our marriage had become, though I hadn't fully admitted that to myself yet. I found him in our bedroom, hunched over an open suitcase on our bed, not our weekend luggage, but the vintage leather travel set I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. My grandmother's antique ring had funded that extravagant gift, though Nathan never knew. He'd assumed it came from my teaching salary, and I'd never corrected him, enjoying the private knowledge that I had resources he wasn't aware of. He straightened when he saw me, his expression cycling through surprise, irritation, and finally settling into a practiced neutrality I recognized from his investor presentations. "You're home early," he said, folding a charcoal sweater with precise movements. Not a question, just a flat observation. The workshop ended sooner than expected. I gestured toward the suitcase. "Going somewhere?" Nathan ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, still thick and lustrous at 46, something he took considerable pride in. He looked tired in a way that makeup couldn't conceal during his frequent media appearances as Portland's tech visionary. "Elena," he said, my name sounding oddly formal on his lips after 15 years of marriage. "We need to have a conversation." Those words, the universal prelude to devastation. I remained in the doorway, suddenly unwilling to step fully into the room, as if maintaining physical distance might somehow protect me from what was coming. "I've been trying to find the right time," he continued, abandoning his packing to sit on the edge of our bed. "There's no easy way to say this." "Then just say it," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. He met my eyes, and I saw not guilt or grief, but relief, as if finally unburdening himself of a weight he'd been carrying. "I'm leaving, Elena. This isn't working anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." I stared at him. This man who'd shared my bed, my name, my life for 15 years, trying to reconcile his words with the reality I'd constructed around us. We had problems, certainly. What marriage didn't? His work consumed him, my creative pursuits frustrated him. We'd grown apart in subtle ways over the years. But leaving? Ending everything we'd built together? Is there someone else? The question escaped before I could decide if I truly wanted the answer. The slight hesitation was confirmation enough, but Nathan had always prided himself on radical honesty in business, if not always in our personal life. "Yes," he admitted, looking down at his wedding band, which I noticed was already absent from his finger. "Rebecca Wilson, The name struck me like a physical blow. Not a stranger. Not someone from his office or conference circuit. Rebecca Wilson, his college girlfriend, the one he'd described as the one that got away after too many whiskeys at a dinner party years ago. The woman whose name sometimes slipped into our bed during his dreams, who appeared in his alumni Facebook photos with increasingly frequent comments. "Becca? Your college girlfriend?" I clarified, still clinging to the possibility I'd misheard or misunderstood. "We reconnected at the tech summit in Seattle last fall. She's divorced now, working in venture capital." He delivered this information as if explaining a particularly promising business opportunity. "It wasn't planned, Elena. But when we started talking again, it was like no time had passed. We just connect in ways that you and I never have." The casual cruelty of that last statement hung in the air between us. 15 years reduced to a deficient connection, rendered insignificant by a rekindled college romance. "Never have?" I repeated, a strange numbness spreading through me. 15 years, Nathan. We built a life together." He sighed. That familiar sound of exasperation I'd grown to recognize whenever I failed to align with his vision. For dinner parties, home decor, or apparently, our entire marriage. A life that revolved around my work, my goals, my social circle. Let's be honest, Elena. You've always been content with the sidelines, teaching part-time, volunteering at community centers, dabbling in your art projects. There's nothing wrong with that, he added quickly, in a tone that suggested there was everything wrong with it. But Becca challenges me. She understands the tech landscape, my ambitions. She's building something meaningful, just like I am. Each word struck, like precision artillery, targeting insecurities he'd helped cultivate over years. My work, teaching art, creating my own pieces, volunteering with underserved communities, had gradually shifted in Nathan's narrative from admirable to hobbyish, to apparently now a fundamental character defect. "When are you leaving?" I asked, still standing in the doorway, unwilling to step further into what was rapidly becoming the scene of my marriage's death. "Tonight," he replied, returning to his packing. "I've already found a place closer to the office, more convenient." "More convenient than the home we chose together?" The shock was beginning to recede, anger flickering in its place. "Temporary," he clarified, not looking up from his methodical packing. "Just until Becca and I figure out next steps. We're actually considering Waterfall Estate if it ever comes on the market." This casual mention was like a final twist of the knife. Waterfall Estate, the historic craftsman mansion in West Hills with its legendary gardens and view of Mount Hood. The property Nathan had pointed out during Sunday drives throughout our marriage, assuring me that someday, when his company reached unicorn status, we'd buy it and restore it to its former glory. Now it seemed someday had arrived, but I'd been replaced in the fantasy. "Waterfall Estate," I repeated flatly. How ambitious of you both. He either missed or chose to ignore my sarcasm. "The current owners are having financial troubles from what I hear through Andrew's real estate connections. Might be available soon." He zipped the suitcase with a decisive sound that seemed to punctuate the end of our life together. "My lawyer will contact you about the separation agreement. I want to be fair, Elena. You'll be taken care of." Taken care of, as if I were a dependent, a responsibility to be managed, not an equal partner being abandoned. In that moment, something hardened inside me, a protective shell forming around the wounded parts. "How considerate," I said, stepping aside as he lifted the suitcase from the bed. 15 years dismissed, but at least you'll be fair about the money." He paused beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the exclusive blend I'd given him last Christmas from that boutique perfumery in France. Another gift he'd assumed came from my modest teacher's salary. "I did love you, Elena," he said, his voice softening slightly. for what it's worth. Did, I echoed, the past tense hanging between us like a ghost. Lucky me. He hesitated, as if waiting for something. Tears, perhaps, or pleas for reconsideration. When none came, he simply nodded and moved past me toward the stairs. I remained motionless, listening to his footsteps descend, the brief pause as he presumably collected something from his office, and finally, the decisive click of our front door. 15 years of marriage ended in a 20-minute conversation and the soft sound of a closing door. I didn't cry. Not then. I moved through our too-quiet home like a visitor in an unfamiliar museum, observing the artifacts of our shared life with clinical detachment. The wedding photo on the mantel, Nathan beaming with confidence, me gazing up at him with adoration. The sleek furniture chosen to project success and sophistication to his business associates. The kitchen remodeled to his specifications despite my preference for something warmer, more inviting. How much of myself had I gradually surrendered over 15 years? How many preferences set aside, opinions withheld, dreams deferred in service to his vision of our life together? I ended up in his home office, the sanctum where Nathan had built his tech empire while I'd brought him coffee and fielded calls from investors when his assistant was unavailable. The space was aggressively masculine, all dark wood, leather, and chrome, designed to convey authority during video calls. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On his desk sat a framed photo I'd never seen before. Nathan and a striking woman with auburn hair at what appeared to be a tech conference, city lights glittering behind them. Becca Wilson, presumably. They looked happy, conspiratorial. How long had this frame been here, hidden in plain sight in our home? Beside it lay a portfolio with the name of his lawyer's firm embossed on the cover. Inside, I found what Nathan had euphemistically called the separation agreement. Already drafted, dated from 3 weeks earlier. The details swam before my eyes. Division of assets, financial arrangements, the clinical dismantling of 15 years together. The most striking detail wasn't what was included, but what was omitted. Any recognition of what I had contributed to his success. The dinner parties I'd hosted for potential investors, the connections I'd facilitated through my community work, the stable home I'd maintained while he traveled, the emotional support during failed product launches and funding, rounds, all erased, as if his trajectory had been a solo journey rather than a partnership. My phone rang, startling me in the silence. Sophia's name flashed on the screen. My best friend since college, the one relationship Nathan had never quite managed to erode despite his subtle digs about her alternative lifestyle as a freelance photographer. "Please tell me you're free for drinks," she said when I answered, her voice a lifeline to normalcy. "I've had the client from hell today and need to rant to someone who won't charge me hourly." "Nathan left me," I said, the words strange and hollow in my mouth. "For his college girlfriend. He packed a suitcase and walked out 20 minutes ago." The silence on the other end lasted only seconds, but felt much longer. "I'm coming over," Sophia finally said, her voice shifting from light to steel. "Don't move, don't call him. And for God's sake, don't sign anything if he left papers." "There's a separation agreement," I confirmed, staring at the document in front of me. "Of course there is," she muttered. "Classic Nathan, planned to the last detail. I'll be there in 15 minutes with reinforcements." True to her word, Sophia arrived 14 minutes later with what she called her emergency breakup kit. A bottle of expensive tequila, artisanal chocolate, and takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant that Nathan had always claimed was too authentic for his palate. She swept into the house like a force of nature, dropping her bags on the kitchen counter and pulling me into a fierce hug before I could summon the protective detachment I'd been clinging to. Against my will, I felt the first cracks in the numbness, tears threatening. "Don't you dare apologize for crying," she said when I tried to pull away. "That bastard deserves a flood, not your restraint." We migrated to the living room with our impromptu feast, and I noticed Sophia eyeing the minimalist furniture with distaste. "First order of business after we get legally sorted? Burning this uncomfortable monstrosity and getting you a sofa." "That actually feels good to sit on," she declared, perching on the edge of the slate gray sectional Nathan had insisted was architectural. Despite everything, I laughed. A small, rusty sound that surprised us both. "He's moving into Waterfall Estate with her," I said, pouring tequila into the mismatched mug Sophia had pulled from the back of my cabinet, colorful pottery I'd made in a ceramics workshop years ago, relegated to storage when Nathan had purchased a set of proper glasses more suited to his image. "Waterfall Estate? The mansion he's been obsessing over?" Sophia's eyebrows shot up. "It's for sale?" "Not yet, but apparently soon." I took a sip of tequila, welcoming the burn. "According to his business network." Sophia snorted. "Of course, the sacred business network." She reached for her phone. "We need reinforcements of the legal variety. My cousin Grace specializes in divorcing wealthy assholes. You're calling her tomorrow." I nodded, too exhausted to argue, though a part of me wondered if fighting for a fair settlement was even worth the energy. What did I want from the remains of this marriage? "He said I'd be taken care of," I told her, the phrase still rankling. Sophia's expression darkened. 15 years supporting his dreams, and he thinks throwing some money your way is taking care of you? Absolutely not. You're entitled to half of everything he built while you were married. The company value, investments, properties, all of it. "I don't want his money," I said reflexively, then paused, considering. "But I don't want to be dismissed either." "Then we make sure you aren't," Sophia said firmly, starting with not accepting whatever lowball offer is in that separation agreement. As the evening progressed and the tequila level in the bottle descended, Sophia guided me through a methodical inventory of my marriage's remains, not just the financial aspects, but the emotional infrastructure that had collapsed so suddenly. "When did he start pulling away?" she asked, her photographer's eye cataloging details I'd managed to ignore. I thought back over the past year, the increasing late nights, the weekend conferences, the growing criticism of my choices and interests. After the Seattle summit last fall, I think. That must be when he reconnected with Becca. The name felt bitter on my tongue. He started questioning everything about me after that trip. My teaching, my community work, even my clothes. Classic comparison behavior. Sophia nodded. She probably wears power suits and talks about market disruption. Over breakfast. The unexpected accuracy of this description startled another laugh from me. She's in venture capital. Apparently, they connect on levels he and I never did. Because nothing says connection like mutual appreciation of profit margins, Sophia muttered, refilling our mugs. What about you, though? Were you happy before all this? The question caught me off guard. Had I been happy? Or had I just been accommodating, adapting, shrinking to fit the increasingly narrow space allocated to me in Nathan's expanding universe? I used to be, I realized aloud. In the beginning, when we were partners. When he valued my perspective, even though it was different from his. When my art was creative instead of unfocused. When my community work was compassionate instead of unambitious. Sophia nodded, understanding. You've been fading out of your own life for years, Elena. Maybe this is your chance to reclaim it. By being divorced at 45 with half a joint checking account. The bitterness surprised me. By remembering who Elena Mitchell was before she became Nathan's carefully curated wife, Sophia countered. The woman who graduated top of our class in design, who interned at that cutthroat agency in New York, who had plans for her own studio before Nathan's. First startup needed all hands on deck. I stared at her, memories surfacing like artifacts from an archaeological dig. versions of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. "That was a long time ago," I said quietly. "Not as long as you think," Sophia replied, reaching for her bag and extracting a worn leather portfolio I immediately recognized. "Remember this?" My old design portfolio, the one I'd assembled during my last year at the agency before leaving to support Nathan's fledgling company. I hadn't seen it in years. "Where did you get this?" "You gave it to me for safekeeping when you moved to that smaller apartment during Nathan's first expansion. Said you didn't have space for mementos in the new place. Another sacrifice I'd forgotten making." I took the portfolio from her, fingers tracing the embossed initials on the cover. Inside were designs I'd created, campaigns I'd contributed to, concepts that had once earned praise from some of the industry's most demanding creative directors. "Elena Mitchell, creative powerhouse," Sophia said softly. "She's still in there. And now she gets to decide what she wants, without Nathan's approval or disapproval factoring into the equation." For the first time since Nathan had walked out the door, I felt something other than shock or anger. A tiny, tentative flutter of possibility. "I wouldn't even know where to start," I admitted. Sophia grinned, her expression mischievous in the way that had always both delighted me and terrified Nathan with its unpredictability. "That's what tomorrow is for," she said, raising her mug in a toast. "Tonight, we mourn the death of your marriage. Tomorrow, we begin planning the resurrection of Elena Mitchell, independent entity." I clinked my mug against hers, a small smile forming despite everything. To resurrection, then. And to Nathan's eventual realization that he made the biggest mistake of his privileged life, Sophia added with satisfaction. After Sophia left, having extracted promises that I would call Grace, change the locks, and not contact Nathan, I wandered through the house that suddenly felt less like home and more like an elegant prison I was being released from. In my bedroom, I opened the closet to find half of it empty, Nathan's precisely organized wardrobe gone as if it had never existed. Only the lingering scent of his cologne remained, a ghost of presence. On impulse, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of our bed, digging beneath the carefully folded cashmere throws to find a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were remnants of the woman Sophia had reminded me of. Sketchbooks filled with designs and concepts, certificates of recognition from design competitions, a worn copy of Creative Direction Quarterly, with my interview about emerging multimedia approaches. Among these artifacts of my former ambitions, I found a business plan I'd drafted during Nathan's first year of success, when my own career aspirations still felt valid and vital. Mitchell Design Collective, the cover read, outlining my vision. For a boutique agency specializing in helping small, community-focused businesses and nonprofits develop impactful visual identities. I had shelved these dreams so gradually I'd hardly noticed. First, the temporary assistance to Nathan's startup had extended from months to years. Then the move to Portland for his expanding business had disconnected me from my professional network. The teaching position was supposed to be an interim step while I established new connections, but somewhere along the way, it had become my primary identity, at least in Nathan's narrative of our life together. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by remnants of my former ambitions, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing, not yet, but a recognition that perhaps Nathan's departure wasn't only an ending. Perhaps it was also, potentially, a beginning. The next morning dawned gray and misty, perfectly matching my emotional state as the reality of my situation settled in more firmly. The numbness had receded, leaving behind a potent mixture of anger, grief, and disorientation. I moved through my morning routine on autopilot. Coffee, shower, dressing in clothes I realized had been selected over years to meet Nathan's subtle expectations rather than my own preferences. My phone had accumulated a concerning number of notifications overnight. Messages from mutual friends with carefully worded concern. a terse email from Nathan about collecting additional belongings over the weekend, and most alarmingly, a calendar. Invitation from his lawyer for a settlement discussion, scheduled for the following week. Before I could spiral into anxiety, a text from Sophia arrived. "Grace can see you at 11. No arguments. I'm driving." Grace Thompson's office occupied the top floor of a renovated industrial building in the Pearl District, its exposed brick, and timber beams softened by modern art and comfortable furnishings. Grace herself was nothing like I expected from Sophia's description of a lawyer who specialized in divorcing wealthy assholes. I had anticipated someone severe and intimidating. Instead, I found a woman about my age with a pragmatic demeanor and kind eyes that hardened only when reviewing the separation agreement Nathan had left. "This," she said, placing the document down with exaggerated care that suggested she'd rather have thrown it across the room, "is insultingly inadequate." It seemed comprehensive, I offered weakly, still struggling to engage fully with the business side of my collapsing marriage. Grace's eyebrow arched eloquently. "Comprehensive in protecting Nathan's interests, perhaps. For you, it's essentially offering a fraction of what you're entitled to under Oregon law." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Elena, you've been married for 15 years, during which your husband's company grew from a startup to a major player. You supported that growth in tangible and intangible ways. The law recognizes that contribution, even if Nathan conveniently doesn't." She pulled out a legal pad, beginning to make notes in a precise hand. "Tell me about your financial situation, separate from Nathan. Any inheritance, family money, accounts he doesn't know about?" I hesitated, then remembered the trust fund. My grandmother had left me, the one I'd only used sparingly over the years for special gifts and emergencies, preferring to let it grow quietly while living primarily on my teaching income and our joint assets. "There's my grandmother's trust," I admitted. "Nathan knows it exists, but not the details. He always dismissed it as insignificant compared to his business ventures." Grace looked up sharply. "And the approximate value?" When I named the figure, both Grace and Sophia stared at me with identical expressions of disbelief. "You've had access to that kind of money all this time?" Sophia finally sputtered. "While living with furniture that feels like sitting on geometric torture devices?" Despite everything, I laughed. The trust was for security, not daily expenses. My grandmother was adamant about that. "Keep your own resources," she always said, "even in the happiest marriage." "Smart woman," Grace nodded approvingly. "And her advice gives us an advantage Nathan isn't expecting." She made another note. "What do you want from this divorce, Elena, beyond the legal entitlements?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? I'd been so focused on what I was losing, I hadn't considered what I might seek to gain. I began, then paused, considering. "I want recognition for the role I played in building Nathan's success. I want enough resources to restart my own career path. And I hesitated, a new thought forming. I want him to confront the reality that I'm not just an accessory he can upgrade when something shinier comes along." Grace's smile was small but satisfied. "Now, that's something I can work with." Over the next 2 hours, we crafted a counter-strategy to Nathan's clean break narrative. Grace explained how we would approach the business valuation, the division of assets, and the documentation of my contributions to Nathan's professional success. It was overwhelming and oddly empowering all at once. "What about Waterfall Estate?" I asked suddenly, remembering Nathan's casual mention of his plans with Becca. "Nathan mentioned it might be coming on the market soon." Grace frowned. "The historic property in West Hills? That would be a significant acquisition. Are you concerned about losing it in the settlement?" "We don't own it," I clarified. "But Nathan has always wanted it. Now he and Becca are apparently planning to buy it when it becomes available. It's..." symbolic for him. The ultimate success marker. An idea began forming, nebulous at first, but rapidly crystallizing into something more concrete. Waterfall. Estate, the physical manifestation of Nathan's ambition. The trophy property he'd coveted throughout our marriage, now reconfigured as the perfect setting for his new life with Rebecca. "Is there something specific about this property in your divorce strategy?" Grace asked, noting my extended silence. I glanced at Sophia, who was watching me with growing understanding. "Not for the divorce," I said slowly. "But perhaps for afterward. If I were interested in acquiring this property myself, hypothetically, what would that process look like?" Grace set down her pen, studying me with newfound interest. "Hypothetically, it would involve establishing your financial qualification, engaging a real estate attorney, and potentially moving quickly when the property comes to market." A small, appreciative smile crossed her face. "Hypothetically, it would be a remarkable statement." "Hypothetically," Sophia interjected, her expression alight with vindicated glee. "It would be the most spectacular power move in post-divorce history." For the first time since Nathan had walked out of our home, I felt something like purpose ignite within me. Not just anger or grief, but the stirring of a plan, a direction, a reclamation of agency. "Sometimes," I said, remembering my grandmother's words from years ago, "the most powerful statement is the one nobody sees coming." Grace nodded, reaching for a business card from her desk. "I have a colleague who specializes in high-end real estate acquisitions. If you're serious about this hypothetical, he would be an excellent resource." I took the card, running my thumb across the embossed name. Victor Henderson, real estate attorney. "I think," I said carefully, "it's time I started taking my own ambitions seriously again." As we left Grace's office, strategy in place and next steps outlined, I felt a strange lightness despite the circumstances. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with legal complexities and emotional landmines. But for the first time since Nathan's departure, it felt like my path. Choices made for my benefit, my future, my reclamation of self. Sophia looped her arm through mine as we waited for the elevator. "I can practically see the gears turning in that creative brain of yours," she observed. "What are you thinking?" I considered the question as the elevator doors opened, stepping inside before answering. "I'm thinking," I said as the doors closed, sealing us in momentary privacy, "that Nathan always underestimated me, and I'm starting to believe that might be the biggest advantage I have." The reality of my new status hit me like a physical blow 3 days after Nathan left, while standing in line at Riverfront Market. I'd forced myself out of the house, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy, despite feeling as though my life had imploded. The cheerful weekend crowd, couples selecting artisanal cheeses and families debating dinner options, made my solitude feel especially stark. "Elena? I thought that was you," came a voice from behind. I turned to find Patricia Winters, wife of Nathan's chief investor and a fixture at company events I'd meticulously planned over the years. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too inquisitive as they darted to my left hand, still bearing my wedding ring. "Patricia, hello," I managed, summoning the social smile I'd perfected during countless business functions. "How are you?" she asked, her tone betraying that she already knew the answer all too well. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, the social script so deeply ingrained I could perform it on autopilot. "Are you sure?" Her voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. "I heard about Nathan and, well, you know." My stomach tightened. Portland's tech community was smaller than most realized, but this was lightning speed even for their efficient gossip network. "I'm sorry," Patricia's eyes widened with artificial concern. "Oh, you don't. I assumed you knew about Nathan and Rebecca." I saw them yesterday at Vine and Table. They seemed quite comfortable together. Vine and Table, our anniversary restaurant, the place where we'd celebrated my 45th birthday just 2 months ago. I felt the color drain from my face, but forced myself to maintain composure. I see, I managed, fighting to keep my expression neutral despite the knife twisting in my chest. They're not being very discreet about it, Patricia continued, seeming to relish her role as bearer of bad news. Everyone's talking. I just assumed you were aware. Everyone's talking. Of course they were. In Portland's tight-knit tech ecosystem, a high-profile separation was prime gossip material, especially one involving a college rekindling. Thank you for your concern, I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning through me. But Nathan and I are handling our private matters privately. Private? Of course. Patricia nodded, not looking remotely convinced. Well, if you need anything... The insincerity of her offer hung in the air between us. I appreciate that, if you'll excuse me. I abandoned my half-filled basket on a nearby shelf and walked out of the market, dignity intact, but pride shattered. In the safety of my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, allowing the tears to come at last, not just for Nathan's betrayal, which had its own dedicated flood already, but for the public spectacle my life had become. The pitying glances, the whispered conversations, the knowledge that I was now cast as the discarded wife, the cautionary tale, the object of gossip. My phone chimed with a text from Sophia. Emergency wine night at my place. Non-negotiable. I have intel. I considered declining, wanting nothing more than to hide away in the emptiness of what had once been our home. But the thought of facing another evening alone with my thoughts was suddenly unbearable. Be there in 30, I texted. Back, starting the car with hands that still trembled slightly. Sophia's loft in the industrial district was everything my and Nathan's home was not. Warm, eclectic, filled with art and books and mismatched furniture that somehow formed a cohesive whole. Her photographs lined the brick walls, capturing moments of such raw emotional truth they often brought viewers to tears. You look like hell, she greeted me, pulling me into a fierce hug before I could summon the protective detachment I'd been clinging to since walking out of Riverfront Market. Patricia Winters cornered me at the market, I explained, following her to the kitchen where she was uncorking a bottle of red wine. They were at Vine and Table yesterday. Everyone knows. Of course they do, Sophia muttered, pouring generous glasses. The Portland tech scene has the information security of a gossip magazine. That's part of what I wanted to talk to you about. She handed me a glass and led me to her overstuffed sofa, the kind of comfortable, lived-in furniture Nathan had declared unsuitable for our image years ago. You remember Marcus Chen? She asked, curling up at the opposite end of the sofa. The name was vaguely familiar. From PNW Creative Solutions, the design firm? Sophia nodded. He's looking for a new creative director, someone with both design expertise and people skills to help them expand their community-focused projects. I stared at her, the wine halfway to my lips. And you mentioned me? I showed him your portfolio, the one you left with me for safekeeping. That was really Nathan making you put away evidence of your former ambitions. She met my gaze directly. He wants to meet you. Sophia, I haven't worked professionally in design for over a decade, I protested, panic rising. I'm completely out of touch with current trends, software. Stop, Sophia interrupted. That's Nathan talking. The fundamentals of good design haven't changed. Yes, there are new tools, but you've been teaching design principles all this time, and your community connections are exactly what PNW is looking to develop. I took a long swallow of wine, trying to quiet the voice in my head. Nathan's voice, listing all the reasons I wasn't qualified, wasn't ready, wasn't enough. I don't know if I can, I admitted quietly. That's fine, Sophia replied with, unexpected gentleness. You don't have to take the job, but meeting Marcus for coffee? Talking about possibilities? That you can do. Before I could formulate another objection, she continued. And there's something else you should know. Something I heard through Olivia, who works at Cascade Venture Partners. I recognize the name of one of Portland's prominent investment firms. What is it? Rebecca Wilson isn't just Nathan's college flame. She's the new partner at Cascade, the firm that's considering a major investment in Nathan's company. Sophia watched me carefully as she delivered this information. Their reconnection happened while she was evaluating his business for potential funding. The implications settled over me slowly, then all at once. So their relationship. I could be as much strategic as romantic, Sophia finished. I'm not saying he doesn't have feelings for her, but Nathan has always been calculating about what serves his interests. A memory surfaced, Nathan explaining years ago why we needed to host dinner for Patricia and Douglas Winters despite my bronchitis. Relationships are capital, Elena. Sometimes you have to invest even when it's inconvenient. I had dragged myself through that evening, smiling through fever and serving the perfect meal while Nathan secured his first major funding round. Just one of countless times I'd subordinated my well-being to his ambitions. He's bringing her to the Tech Innovators Gala next week, Sophia added, refilling my glass. Olivia heard they've requested a table near the stage. The Tech Innovators Gala, the annual charity event I'd helped organize for years, selecting the caterer, arranging the floral displays, coordinating with silent auction donors. It was supposed to be another evening of playing the perfect corporate wife, of bolstering Nathan's image and connections. I can't face that, I said immediately. The thought of watching Nathan parade Rebecca around in front of Portland's entire tech community making my stomach churn. I can't sit at home picturing it either. Then don't, Sophia said simply. Go. I stared at her. To the gala? Alone? That's brave? Defiant? A statement that you refuse to disappear? Sophia suggested. All of the above? I was going to say masochistic, I countered, but found myself considering the possibility despite my instinctive recoil. Nothing says I'm not destroyed like showing up looking spectacular while he's trying to erase you from the narrative, Sophia pointed out. Plus, Marcus Chen will be there. Perfect opportunity for an informal introduction. The thought of facing the whispers, the pitying glances, the inevitable awkward encounters made my chest tighten. But beneath the anxiety, I felt something else stirring. Defiance, perhaps. A refusal to be relegated to the role of absent, devastated ex. I don't even know if I still have an invitation, I hedged. Sophia's smile turned triumphant. You do. I checked with the committee. Your name is still on the list, separate from Nathan's. Apparently, he assumed you wouldn't have the courage to show up. That assumption, so typical of Nathan's certainty about how I would react, how I would feel, who I would be, kindled something inside me, a small flame of resistance that had been smothered for too long. What would I even wear? I wondered aloud, tacitly accepting the challenge. Sophia's grin widened. Something he's never seen before. Something that makes it clear Elena Mitchell doesn't need Nathan's approval to be magnificent. For the first time since Nathan walked out, I felt something other than pain or rage or numbness. Something that felt dangerously like anticipation. The Tech Innovators Gala fell exactly 11 days after Nathan left, though it felt like both an eternity, and an instant had passed. The intervening days had been a blur of practical matters, consulting with Grace about legal strategy, having the locks changed, opening a separate bank account, and most terrifyingly, meeting Marcus Chen for coffee to discuss potential opportunities at PNW Creative Solutions. To my surprise, the meeting had gone well. Marcus was nothing like the intimidating creative director I'd imagined. Instead, he was thoughtful, engaged, and genuinely interested in my perspective on using design to support community initiatives. Your teaching experience is actually a major plus for us, he'd said, contradicting my apologetic framing of my career gap. We need someone who can communicate complex design concepts to clients who don't have a visual background. And your community connections? That's network. Gold for the direction we're taking the firm. I'd left with an invitation to visit the studio and meet the team. Not a job offer yet, but a door cracked open to possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to contemplate in years. Now, standing in front of the mirror in Sophia's loft, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Gone was the subtle, understated aesthetic Nathan had gradually shaped over our years together. Instead, I wore a midnight blue gown with an architectural neckline that managed to be both elegant and striking, a vintage piece Sophia had discovered at a boutique in the Alberta Arts District. Nathan always steered you toward muted colors. She'd explained while helping me try it on. Cream, taupe, pale blue, nothing that would draw attention away from him. This is your reemergence, not as Nathan's +1, but as Elena Mitchell, force of nature. My hair, usually styled in the conservative bob Nathan preferred, professional but not trying too hard, he'd directed our stylist, had been cut into a more dramatic asymmetrical style that emphasized my cheekbones and brought focus to my eyes. The overall effect was someone familiar yet transformed, like meeting a more confident version of myself from a parallel universe where I'd never dimmed my light to make Nathan comfortable. Stop second-guessing, Sophia instructed, appearing behind me in the mirror. In her emerald green jumpsuit with a camera slung around her neck, she was photographing the event for the charity's website. She looked effortlessly confident. You look incredible, like yourself, but more so. I feel like I'm wearing a costume, I admitted, adjusting the unfamiliar weight of statement earrings, another departure from the discreet jewelry Nathan had always preferred. That's because Nathan convinced you the real you was too much, Sophia replied, her expression softening. This isn't a costume, Elena. It's an unveiling. The gala was being held at the Riverside Botanical Gardens, the glass-walled event space, overlooking illuminated pathways and sculptural installations. As our rideshare approached, I felt my courage wavering, the thought of facing Portland's tech elite as a newly separated woman suddenly overwhelming. I can't do this, I whispered, panic rising as the car pulled into the circular drive where attendees in formal wear were being greeted by valets. Sophia took my hand, her grip firm. Yes, you can. You've been managing these people for years, making them comfortable, remembering their children's names, smoothing Nathan's path. Tonight, you're just doing it for yourself. The simple reframing steadied me. She was right. I'd navigated this world for years, not as a passive accessory, but as an active facilitator of Nathan's success. I knew these people, their insecurities, their vanities, their connections. I had built relationships independent of Nathan, even if he'd been the initial reason for those connections. Ready? Sophia asked as the car stopped. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Ready? The moment we entered the soaring glass atrium, I felt the subtle shift in attention, the quick glances, the whispered exchanges. I was the evening's unexpected variable, the abandoned wife brave enough, or foolish enough, to show her face at an event where her husband would be debuting his new relationship. But something strange happened as I moved through the crowd, Sophia close at my side. Instead of the unified wall of awkwardness I'd feared, I encountered a community divided in its response. Some people did indeed avoid eye contact, gravitating toward Nathan's orbit out of self-interest or discomfort. But others approached with genuine warmth, the event coordinator I'd worked with for years, the head of a nonprofit I'd connected, with Nathan's company for their community outreach, the caterer who'd always appreciated my detailed attention to dietary restrictions and presentation preferences. Elena, I'm so glad you came, said Lisa Harmon, executive director of the Children's Art Initiative, embracing me with genuine affection. I was hoping to discuss an idea for expanding our workshop program, and I'd value your input. Do you have time for coffee next week? Before I could respond, Marcus Chen appeared at Lisa's side, his smile warm and his manner relaxed in contrast to the calculated networking happening around us. "Elena, good to see you again," he said, extending his hand. "Lisa, has Elena told you about her ideas for integrating design thinking into community education? We were discussing it the other day. It's exactly the kind of innovative approach your program might benefit from." The conversation flowed with surprising ease, focusing on projects and possibilities rather than my personal situation. For precious minutes, I existed not as Nathan's ex, but as a professional with valuable insights and connections of my own. Our discussion was interrupted by the subtle shift in the room's energy that indicated a significant arrival. I didn't need to turn to know it was Nathan. The change in atmosphere was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat, after years of monitoring rooms for his entrance, gauging reactions, preparing to smooth his integration into whatever gathering we were attending. But this time, I wasn't responsible for managing his reception or ensuring his comfort. This time, I was simply another attendee with my own purpose for being there. Despite my resolution not to react, I found myself turning slightly, a movement so ingrained it was almost involuntary. Nathan stood near the entrance, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo I recognized as new, not the one I'd helped him select for these events in previous years. Beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, stood a striking woman with auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Rebecca Wilson, the college sweetheart, the venture capitalist, the woman who, according to Nathan, challenged him and understood his ambitions in ways I never had. "Breathe," Sophia murmured beside me, her hand brushing my back briefly before she moved away to photograph a group of major donors. I realized I had indeed been holding my breath, my body locked in a moment of suspended animation as I absorbed the visual confirmation of what had replaced me. Rebecca was beautiful, certainly, but it wasn't her physical appearance that struck me most forcefully. It was the way she carried herself, the confident posture, the calculated smile, the subtle but unmistakable signals of someone who moved through professional spaces with authority rather than accommodation. I recognized in her everything Nathan had gradually trained out of me over 15 years. The assertiveness, the professional presence, the refusal to be merely decorative. "They make quite the power couple," Lisa observed, following my gaze with a diplomacy that didn't quite mask her disapproval. Though between us, I always found her approach at Cascade rather cold, effective, but without much consideration for the human element. Her subtle allegiance offered in this casual observation brought an unexpected lump to my throat. I had allies here, I realized. People who saw me as more than an extension of Nathan's identity. "Elena," Marcus's voice, drew my attention back to our circle. "I was just telling Lisa about the community design initiative we discussed. Would you be interested in joining us for a planning session next week? Your perspective would be valuable." I felt rather than saw Nathan notice me then, his awareness prickling across the space between us. For years, I'd been attuned to his moods, his needs, his unspoken expectations. That connection hadn't yet dissolved, despite everything. "I'd like that," I said to Marcus, choosing to focus on the conversation at hand rather than the weight of Nathan's attention. "I have some ideas about integrating traditional design processes with community participation models." As we continued our discussion, I was acutely aware of Nathan and Rebecca making their way through the room, receiving congratulations and interest from the very people who had for years treated me with the polite dismissal reserved for corporate spouses. The familiar twist of inadequacy threatened to undermine my fragile confidence. "Excuse me," I murmured to Marcus and Lisa, needing a moment to compose myself. "I'm going to find the ladies' room." In the quiet sanctuary of the powder room, I braced my hands against the marble counter, meeting my own eyes in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me was elegant, composed, and carrying a profound sadness beneath her carefully applied makeup. "You're allowed to feel this," I whispered to my reflection, giving myself permission to acknowledge the hurt without surrendering to it. "You're allowed to grieve what you lost, and you're allowed to discover what might come next." The door opened, and I straightened automatically, preparing to offer a social smile to whoever entered. Instead, I found myself face to face with Rebecca Wilson herself, the architect of my marriage's destruction, or perhaps merely the catalyst for its inevitable collapse. We stared at each other for a frozen moment, mutual recognition and the absurdity of our encounter rendering us both momentarily speechless. "Elena," she finally said, her voice professionally modulated, neither warm nor overtly hostile. "I didn't expect to see you here." The simple statement contained multitudes: her surprise at my presence, the implicit suggestion that this was no longer my territory, the careful neutrality that neither acknowledged nor apologized for her role in upending my life. "I've been involved with this event for years," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "The Children's Art Initiative is important to me." Rebecca nodded, moving to the adjacent sink to check her already flawless appearance. "It's good work," she agreed. "Cascade has been considering increased investment in arts education initiatives." The banality of discussing professional philanthropy while standing beside the woman now sharing my husband's bed was so surreal I nearly laughed. Instead, I gathered my evening bag, preparing to leave this uncomfortable encounter. "He didn't mean to hurt you," Rebecca said suddenly, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "Nathan. He speaks very highly of you." The presumption that she knew Nathan's intentions, that she had any right to offer me assurances about his regard, struck me with unexpected force. "How comforting," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "And how convenient that his high regard coincided so precisely with meeting someone who could advance his business interests." Rebecca's expression stiffened, then relaxed into something more genuine than her previous professional mask. "That's fair," she acknowledged, "and not entirely inaccurate. Nathan is strategic in his relationships." The understatement was so profound it startled a small, bitter laugh from me. "Yes, he is. Something to consider as you move forward together." I moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to face her directly. A word of advice from someone who spent 15 years learning Nathan's patterns? Be careful about challenging him too directly or outshining him professionally. His admiration for strong, ambitious women tends to last exactly as long as that strength is directed toward advancing his goals rather than your own. Rebecca's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty, quickly masked. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I think our situation is different." I smiled, recognizing in her conviction the same belief I'd once held, that I was the exception, that our connection was unique, that the patterns evident in Nathan's past relationships somehow wouldn't apply to ours. "I hope you're right," I said simply, and left her to her reflections. Returning to the gala, I felt strangely lighter, as if the direct confrontation with Rebecca had lanced something poisonous that had been festering beneath my composure. She wasn't a villain in a simple narrative of betrayal. She was a complicated woman making choices based on her own desires and ambitions, just as Nathan was, just as I was now beginning to do again. Marcus waved me over to where he stood with a small group near the silent auction tables. "Elena, perfect timing. I was just telling Andrew about your community workshop model. Would you mind elaborating?" For the next hour, I circulated through the gala with growing confidence, engaging in conversations about design, community initiatives, and Portland's evolving creative landscape. Though I remained aware of Nathan and Rebecca's presence, his hand occasionally resting possessively at the small of her back, her animated discussions with potential investors, they gradually became just another element of the evening, rather than its defining feature. When dinner was announced, I found myself seated at a table with Marcus, Lisa, and several other key figures in Portland's creative community. A testament to the connections I'd built independently of Nathan, though I hadn't fully recognized their value until now. Across the room, Nathan and Rebecca occupied prime positions near the stage where the evening's awards would be presented. I watched as he leaned close to whisper something in her ear, her responding smile both intimate and performative for their audience. "Quite the display they're putting on," Sophia muttered, pausing beside my chair during her circuit of the room with her camera. "Like they're auditioning for Portland's next power couple." "Let them perform," I replied, surprised to find I meant it. I'm discovering there's freedom in no longer being part of the show. The evening progressed with speeches, awards, and the announcement of fundraising totals. I applauded politely when Nathan received recognition for his company's contributions to youth technology education, watching as he accepted the plaque with Rebecca beaming at his side. There was pain in witnessing this public display of his new life, certainly. But woven through that pain was a thread of something unexpected: relief. Relief at no longer being responsible for maintaining the perfect supportive spouse facade. Relief at engaging with people based on my own interests rather than Nathan's business needs. Relief at glimpsing possibilities for a future defined by my own choices rather than accommodation of his. As the formal program concluded and guests began to depart or move to the adjoining terrace for after-dinner drinks, Marcus approached my table. "Elena, I've been meaning to ask, would you be available to come to the studio next Thursday? The team is presenting concept boards for the Riverfront Community Project, and I'd value your perspective. No pressure, just an opportunity to see how we work and perhaps offer some insights." The invitation, professional, respectful, focused on my expertise rather than my personal situation, felt like a lifeline extending toward a future I was just beginning to imagine. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the genuine enthusiasm in my voice. "Thank you, Marcus." As he moved away to say his goodbyes to other guests, I felt a presence at my shoulder and turned to find Nathan standing there, his expression carefully neutral but with tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "Elena," he said, my name sounding oddly formal on his lips. "I didn't expect to see you here." The echo of Rebecca's earlier statement in the powder room was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. Perhaps they were more aligned than I'd given them credit for. "It's a cause I care about," I replied simply. "You're looking well?" It was true. He appeared polished, successful, exactly as he'd always cultivated his image to be. But there was something else visible to me after 15 years of intimate knowledge. A tightness around his eyes, a slight stiffness in his smile that suggested all was perhaps not as seamless in his new life as the public performance indicated. "You too," he said, his gaze taking in my transformed appearance with poorly concealed surprise. "That's not your usual style." "No," I agreed pleasantly. "It's not the style you selected for me, it's my own." His expression flickered with something between irritation and confusion, the familiar reaction whenever I had deviated from his carefully constructed vision of our life together. "I see you've met Marcus Chen," he continued, changing tack. "He's doing interesting work, though on a much smaller scale than what you're used to." The subtle diminishment was so characteristic, I almost smiled at its predictability. The implicit suggestion that anything outside Nathan's orbit must naturally be less significant, less valuable. "His firm's community focus aligns well with my interests," I replied. "And scale isn't always the most important measure of impact." Nathan's expression hardened slightly. "Of course. I'm glad you're keeping busy." The patronizing phrase hung between us, reminiscent of countless similar dismissals over the years. His reflexive recategorization of my pursuits as hobbies rather than meaningful work. "How are the divorce proceedings coming along?" he asked, lowering his voice despite the ambient noise of the gala ensuring our privacy. "My lawyer mentioned there have been some complications with your counterproposal." "Not complications," I corrected gently. "Just a more accurate assessment of my contributions to our partnership. Grace is very thorough." The mention of my lawyer's name, evidence that I had secured independent representation rather than accepting his predetermined terms, triggered a subtle shift in his posture, a new wariness entering his expression. "I'd hoped we could handle this amicably," he said, the familiar note of disappointment entering his voice. The tone that had so often made me question my own judgment, adjust my behavior to regain his approval. "Amicable doesn't mean inequitable," I observed, meeting his gaze directly. "But I'm sure our lawyers can work toward a fair resolution." Before he could respond, Rebecca appeared at his side, her hand slipping possessively through his arm in a gesture I recognized from my own years of subtle territorial marking at similar events. "There you are," she said to Nathan before acknowledging me with a nod. "Elena, lovely to see you again." "You as well," I replied with perfect social courtesy. "Congratulations on your new position at Cascade. I understand you'll be overseeing their community investment portfolio. The Children's Art Initiative would be an excellent addition. Their results with underprivileged youth are particularly impressive." The professional recommendation, offered without rancor or obvious agenda, seemed to momentarily disarm her practiced poise. "Thank you. I'll look into their programs," she said, genuine interest briefly replacing the careful neutrality of her expression. "I should let you both get back to your evening," I said, gathering my clutch and wrap. "Nathan, I'm sure our lawyers will be in touch about the next steps." As I walked away, I felt Nathan's gaze following me, puzzled, perhaps even concerned by this unfamiliar version of the woman he'd dismissed as lacking ambition or challenge. The Elena who had shown up tonight wasn't the accommodating, diminished wife he'd left behind, but neither was she a vengeful ex bent on making a scene. She was something more complicated, a woman in the process of reclaiming herself, piece by careful piece. Outside in the cool Portland evening, Sophia found me watching the stars emerge above the botanical garden's illuminated pathways. "Victory." "Lab?" she asked, slipping her arm through mine with a sympathetic squeeze. "Something like that," I agreed, surprising myself with the genuine smile that formed. "Though it feels less like winning a contest and more like finding pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed." As we walked toward the waiting line of cars, I realized the ache in my chest had shifted, not disappeared, but transformed. The grief of Nathan's betrayal and the end of my marriage remained, but alongside it grew something else, something that felt dangerously like hope, like possibility, like the first tender shoots of a new life emerging from cleared ground. "Ready to go home?" Sophia asked as we approached the valet stand. I considered the question, understanding she meant more than just our physical destination for the evening. "Not quite yet," I admitted, "but I think I'm ready to start figuring out where home might be." The day after the gala, I woke with a curious sense of possibility I hadn't felt since Nathan's departure. Sunlight filtered through the blinds I'd always wanted to replace with warmer curtains, one of countless small preferences I'd set aside to accommodate Nathan's minimalist aesthetic. Today, that compromise felt like a symbol of all the ways I'd diminished myself to fit into his vision of our life together. My phone buzzed with an incoming email from Marcus. The subject line read simply, "Next steps?" Opening it, I found a thoughtful note thanking me for our conversation at the gala and reiterating his invitation to visit PNW Creative Solutions the following Thursday. He'd attached several case studies of community projects they'd completed, adding that my perspective on their upcoming riverfront initiative would be particularly valuable. The email ended with a question that made me pause. What would your ideal role look like if you were to join our team? I'm curious about how you envision applying your unique combination of design expertise and community engagement experience. No one had asked about my ideal role in years. Nathan had never inquired what I might want beyond supporting his ambitions. Even before leaving my agency position to help with his first startup, my professional aspirations had gradually become secondary considerations in our shared future plans. I closed the email without responding, needing time to consider a question I hadn't asked myself in far too long. What did I want? Rising from bed, I moved through the house with new awareness, noticing all the ways our home reflected Nathan's preferences rather than mine. The austere furniture chosen to impress his business associates. The monochromatic color scheme he'd insisted projected sophistication. The conspicuous absence of personal photographs or mementos that might disrupt his carefully curated aesthetic. In the kitchen, I opened cabinets to find the expensive coffee beans Nathan preferred, the protein supplements he consumed each morning, the sleek appliances he'd selected for their design rather than functionality. Even our food reflected his tastes rather than mine. On impulse, I grabbed my keys and headed to the farmer's market I'd always loved, but gradually stopped visiting because Nathan found it inefficient compared to grocery delivery services. The morning air held the crisp promise of early summer as I wandered among stalls overflowing with fresh produce, artisanal breads, and local crafts. "Elena, haven't seen you in ages," called Mei Lin from her flower stand, where vibrant arrangements contrasted beautifully with Portland's typically overcast sky. "It's been too long," I admitted, drawn to a bouquet of sunset-hued dahlias that would have never found a home in the minimalist vases Nathan preferred. "These are perfect for you," Mei said, following my gaze. "They've got fire in them, just like you used to." Used to. The simple phrase struck me with unexpected force. Had I lost that fire? Or merely banked it to accommodate a life that required less heat, less color, less of myself? I'll take them, I decided, the small rebellion of bringing those vibrant blooms into my austere home feeling surprisingly significant. I continued through the market, selecting crusty sourdough bread, locally made cheeses, and fresh berries, foods chosen solely for my pleasure rather than their alignment with someone else's preferences. Each selection felt like a tiny step toward reclaiming my autonomy, my tastes, my identity separate from the role I'd played in Nathan's life. At the far end of the market, I spotted a stall I hadn't noticed before. A woman approximately my age selling handcrafted wooden furniture, with clean lines but warm organic elements that contrasted sharply with the cold modernism of Nathan's preferred aesthetic. "These are beautiful," I said, running my hand over the smooth surface of a small side table with subtle inlaid details. "Thank you," she replied, her smile genuine. "I started making them as therapy after my divorce 5 years ago. Now it's a full-time business." Something in her casual mention of transformation resonated deeply. "You taught yourself woodworking after your divorce?" She nodded. "I was an accountant for 20 years, hated most of it but stayed because it was secure. When my marriage ended, I realized I didn't know what I actually enjoyed anymore. Woodworking was the first thing I tried that felt like me." "How did you know where to start?" I asked, the question emerging from somewhere deeper than mere curiosity about furniture making. She studied me for a moment, seeming to recognize something familiar in my expression. I started by asking myself what I'd always been drawn to, but never pursued. What made me lose track of time when I was doing it? What I'd regret not trying if I reached the end of my life without attempting it? She handed me a business card. "I teach workshops now, too, if you're ever interested." I glanced at the card. Second chapter woodworking. Create what comes next. and slipped it into my bag, thanking her before continuing on my way, her words echoing in my thoughts. When I returned home, arms laden with my market purchases, I was struck anew by the sterility of the space, its perfect organization and lack of personality suddenly insufferable rather than sophisticated. The dahlias looked almost defiant in their vibrancy against the monochromatic backdrop of my living room. My phone rang, Grace Thompson's name appearing on the screen. "Elena," she greeted me, her tone businesslike but warm. "I've reviewed the updated settlement proposal from Nathan's attorney. They've made some concessions, but it's still significantly undervaluing your contributions. I've prepared a counter that more accurately reflects both your direct and indirect investments in building Nathan's success." As Grace outlined the details, I found myself focusing with unexpected clarity on the financial implications of the divorce. For years, I'd left financial matters primarily to Nathan, accepting his judgments about investments, expenditures, and long-term planning. Now, listening to Grace's methodical explanation of valuations and distributions, I felt a growing determination to understand not just the divorce settlement, but my complete financial picture. "There's something else," Grace added after completing her summary. "Victor Henderson called me. He mentioned you were potentially interested in Waterfall Estate?" The change of subject caught me off guard. "It was just an idea," I explained. "A hypothetical. Nathan mentioned it might be coming on the market soon, and that he and Rebecca were interested in acquiring it." "It's more than hypothetical now," Grace replied. "Victor has connections with the current owners. They're preparing to list it next month, but they're open to private offers before it hits the market. If you're serious about exploring this possibility, now would be the time to connect with Victor directly." My heart rate accelerated at this unexpected development. Waterfall Estate, the historic craftsman mansion in West Hills with its renowned gardens and views of Mount Hood, had been Nathan's aspirational trophy property for years. His casual mention of planning to acquire it with Rebecca had been a particularly cutting detail in the dissolution of our marriage. The idea of purchasing it myself had begun as a vague notion of poetic justice, a fantasy of reclaiming something Nathan coveted. But now, faced with the actual possibility, I needed to consider whether this was truly something I wanted or merely a reaction to Nathan's betrayal. "I'll call Victor," I decided, surprising myself with my certainty. Even if I just explore the option, I should understand what would be involved. After ending the call with Grace, I sat at my kitchen island, surrounded by my farmer's market purchases, their vibrant colors and textures contrasting with the sleek, impersonal surfaces Nathan had selected. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Warmth and authenticity beginning to reclaim space from cold precision. Victor Henderson's office occupied the ground floor of a beautifully restored Victorian in Portland's historic Alphabet District. Unlike the aggressively modern architecture of Nathan's business premises, the space balanced historic character with thoughtful updates, original woodwork and leaded glass windows alongside contemporary art and technology. "Ms. Mitchell," Victor greeted me, rising from behind a desk that appeared to be a genuine antique rather than the mid-century reproductions currently trending in Portland's design circles. "Thank you for coming in person. Real estate of this caliber deserves face-to-face conversation." Victor was older than I expected, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and the relaxed confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. As he guided me to a seating area near windows overlooking a Japanese-inspired garden, I was struck by how different this environment felt from the power positioning and status signaling that characterized Nathan's professional interactions. "Grace mentioned your interest in Waterfall Estate," he began, opening an elegant leather portfolio. "I should note that while I know Grace through professional channels, my obligation here would be solely to you as a potential buyer." "I appreciate the clarity," I said, gathering my thoughts. "To be honest, I'm still determining whether this is a serious consideration or merely an intriguing possibility." Victor nodded, seeming untroubled by my hesitation. A property of this significance should never be an impulse purchase. Perhaps we should start with what draws you to Waterfall Estate specifically? The question gave me pause. What did draw me to this property, beyond its symbolic connection to Nathan's ambitions? I've always appreciated its architectural integrity, I began slowly, finding my way to truth as I spoke. While many historic properties in Portland have been aggressively modernized, Waterfall Estate maintains a conversation between its craftsmen, origins, and thoughtful contemporary elements. The gardens are exceptional, designed to complement the house rather than as separate showpieces. I hesitated, then added with unexpected honesty, and yes, there's personal significance. My soon-to-be ex-husband has coveted this property for years. The thought of acquiring it myself carries a certain symmetry. Rather than appearing troubled by this admission, Victor seemed to appreciate the candor. Personal motivation often drives the most meaningful acquisitions, he observed, though I would caution against making a multi-million-dollar purchase solely for its emotional impact. I understand, I assured him. If I were to pursue this, it would need to make sense personally, aesthetically, and financially. Victor opened his portfolio, revealing photographs of Waterfall Estate that captured its stone facade, expansive gardens, and interior spaces with warm wood detailing and craftsman elements I'd always found appealing. The current owners purchased the property 8 years ago and completed extensive restoration work, Victor explained. Unfortunately, they overextended financially during the renovation and now find themselves in a position where selling has become necessary. He outlined the property details: 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, original woodwork throughout, updated systems, 3 acres of landscaped grounds including the waterfall feature that gave the estate its name, and a separate carriage house that had been converted to a studio space. When he named the anticipated asking price, I managed to keep my expression neutral despite the momentary internal shock. It was substantial, at the upper limit of what I might be able to manage with my grandmother's trust and whatever settlement I received from the divorce, but not entirely out of reach. The property will likely attract significant interest. Once publicly listed, Victor continued. However, the owners are open to a private sale if it means avoiding the disruption of showings and potentially lengthy negotiations. What would be the timeline for such a private arrangement? I asked, surprising myself with how seriously I was considering this possibility. If you're genuinely interested, we could arrange a private viewing next week. Should you decide to proceed, we could potentially have an agreement in principle within 2 weeks, with closing dependent on your financial arrangements and their timeline for relocating. The pace was faster than I'd anticipated, adding another layer of complexity to an already significant decision. Yet something about the urgency felt appropriate, a catalyst forcing me to make active choices rather than passive accommodations. I'd like to see the property, I decided. After that, I'll be better positioned to determine whether this is a realistic consideration. As I left Victor's office with arrangements made for a private viewing the following Tuesday, I felt an unexpected lightness despite the magnitude of what I was contemplating. Perhaps it was simply the experience of making a decision based solely on my own judgment, without filtering it through Nathan's preferences or expectations. My phone rang as I walked back to my car, Sophia, calling with her characteristic awful timing. "How was lawyer meeting number 2? She asked without preamble when I answered. "Are we buying a mansion to spite Nathan?" I laughed despite myself. "Not to spite him," I corrected, settling into the driver's seat. "Possibly because I genuinely love the property and it would be a sound investment. The spite would just be a bonus." "That's my girl," Sophia approved. "So we're really doing this?" "I'm viewing the property next week," I clarified. "After that, we'll see." "Well, while you're contemplating major real estate decisions, I have news that might factor into your considerations. I just heard from Marcus Chen." I tensed slightly. "About?" Apparently, you made quite an impression at the gala. He's not just interested in having you consult on the riverfront project, he's creating a position for you, Director of Community. Design initiatives, made for your specific skill set. The news struck me with a complex mixture of emotions: excitement, validation, and a thread of anxiety about stepping back into professional identity I'd set aside for so long. That's significant, I managed. It's perfect, Sophia corrected. Combining your design background with your community connections, creating something that matters. Exactly what you wanted to do before Nathan's first startup hijacked your trajectory. She was right, I realized with a jolt of recognition. The position Marcus described echoed ambitions I'd held before gradually reshaping my aspirations to complement Nathan's. The reminder that I'd once had clear professional goals independent of my role as Nathan's supportive partner was both painful and energizing. "I'm visiting the studio next Thursday," I said, starting my car. "I'll get a better sense of the opportunity then." "And if both options feel right," Sophia pressed, "dream job and dream house, then I'll have some significant decisions to make," I acknowledged, "but they'll be my decisions." The week that followed brought a whirlwind of activity as I navigated my evolving divorce proceedings, preparations for visiting both Waterfall Estate and PNW Creative Solutions, and the gradual reconfiguration of my daily life without Nathan's presence. I began making small but meaningful changes to my home, moving furniture to more comfortable arrangements, bringing out treasured items Nathan had deemed too cluttered or colorful for his preferred aesthetic, and gradually transforming the space to reflect my tastes rather than his curated image. Each adjustment felt like a tiny declaration of independence, a reclaiming of space both physical and psychological. I rediscovered preferences and pleasures I'd set aside years ago, filling the house with fresh flowers, playing music Nathan had dismissed as unsophisticated, leaving books open on surfaces rather than hidden away for a cleaner appearance. Tuesday, morning dawned clear and bright as I prepared to meet Victor for my private viewing of Waterfall Estate. I dressed with care, selecting clothes that balanced professionalism with comfort, choices made for my preferences rather than to project an image Nathan would approve. Victor was waiting at the property gates when I arrived, standing beside his understated luxury sedan in contrast to the ostentatious vehicles Nathan's colleagues typically chose. The wrought iron gate stood open, revealing a winding driveway flanked by mature maple trees whose vibrant leaves caught the morning sunlight. The approach was designed to create a sense of arrival, Victor explained as we drove slowly up the curving drive. The house remains partially hidden until the final turn, then reveals itself all at once. He was right. As we rounded the last gentle curve, Waterfall Estate appeared before us in its full glory. The craftsman mansion, with its distinctive stone facade and deep eaves, sat perfectly positioned to capture both morning light and views of Mott Hood in the distance. "It's even more beautiful than the photographs," I said softly as we parked in the circular drive. "The current owners were away," Victor explained, giving us free rein to explore at our own pace. As we entered through the heavy front door with its leaded glass insets, I was struck by the quality of light, warm and golden as it filtered through original windows, highlighting the exceptional woodwork throughout the main floor. Most of the architectural details are original, Victor noted as I ran my hand along a particularly beautiful built-in bookcase. The renovation focused on preserving character while updating systems and kitchens and baths for contemporary living. We moved through the house, from the gracious entry hall to the living room with its massive stone fireplace, the dining room with original box beam ceilings, the updated kitchen that balanced modern functionality with period-appropriate detailing. Each space felt both grand and somehow intimate, historic yet comfortable for actual living rather than mere display. Upstairs, 5 bedrooms offered views of either the gardens or Mott Hood, with window seats and reading nooks that immediately had me imagining quiet mornings with coffee and a book. The primary suite included a sitting area with its own fireplace and a renovated bathroom featuring a clawfoot tub positioned to capture garden views. It was the third floor that truly captured my heart, a space the current owners had converted to an artist's studio, with skylights providing abundant natural light and built-in storage for supplies and works in progress. This was originally servants' quarters, Victor explained as I moved through the space, already envisioning it filled with design work and creative projects. The renovation opened up the ceiling to the rafters and added the skylights. As meaningful as the house itself was, the gardens proved equally compelling. We exited through French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking 3 acres of thoughtfully designed landscape. Pathways winding through mature trees, sculpture gardens transitioning to more naturalistic plantings, and finally, the waterfall itself, cascading down artfully arranged boulders into a reflective pool. The water feature is fed by a natural spring on the property, Victor noted, as we stood watching sunlight create rainbows in the spray. The original owner designed it as a meditation space. I could imagine Nathan coveting this estate. Its status value alone would appeal to his carefully cultivated image as a successful tech entrepreneur. But standing here, I realized I appreciated the property for entirely different reasons. Its beauty, its craftsmanship, its sense of history and continuity. The carriage house is this way, Victor indicated, leading me along a stone path to a smaller structure that had been converted into a guest house and additional studio space. The current owners used it as accommodation for visiting artists during summer workshops they hosted. By the time we completed our tour, returning to the main house's welcoming front porch, I had fallen irrevocably in love with Waterfall Estate, not as a status symbol or a gesture of defiance against Nathan, but as a space that resonated with who I was and who I might become. I would need to review my finances carefully, I told Victor as we prepared to leave. But I'd like to explore making an offer. Victor nodded, seeming unsurprised by my decision. I thought this property might speak to you. It has a quality that transcends its obvious market value, a sense of place that connects with certain people. As we drove back down the winding driveway, I glanced in the side mirror, watching Waterfall Estate recede from view. For the first time since Nathan's departure, I felt something approaching excitement about the future. Not just recovery from loss, but creation of something new. Thursday brought my scheduled visit to PNW Creative Solutions, adding another layer to my evolving considerations about what might come next. The firm occupied the upper floors of a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, with expansive windows overlooking the Willamette River and mountains beyond. Unlike the austere status-signaling design of Nathan's company headquarters, PNW's offices felt vibrant and collaborative. Open workspaces balanced with quieter areas for concentration, walls displaying both finished client work and in-progress concepts. Staff engaged in animated discussions around project tables rather than sequestered behind closed doors. Marcus greeted me with genuine warmth, introducing me to the diverse team of designers, strategists, and community liaison specialists who comprised the firm's core staff. We've structured today as a combination of observation and participation, he explained as he showed me to a small but comfortable office they'd arranged for my use. The morning presentation on Riverfront will give you a sense of our process. Then this afternoon, if you're comfortable, we'd love your input on some community engagement challenges we're facing with the project. The morning unfolded exactly as Marcus described. I observed the team present initial concept boards for transforming a neglected riverfront area into a vibrant community space that balanced environmental restoration with public gathering places and economic revitalization. For surrounding neighborhoods, what struck me most was the collaborative nature of their process. Designers and community specialists working in genuine partnership rather than the hierarchical approach I'd experienced early in my career and observed in Nathan's business operations. Questions were welcomed, disagreements explored productively, and diverse perspectives actively sought rather than merely tolerated. During the lunch break, I found myself in animated conversation with Layla, the firm's lead community liaison, discussing engagement strategies for neighborhoods historically excluded from development decisions. The traditional public meeting model is broken, she argued, as we shared takeout from a nearby Vietnamese restaurant. It privileges those with flexible schedules, comfortable public speaking skills, and confidence navigating institutional settings. What if we reverse the dynamic? I suggested, an idea forming as we talked. Instead of asking community members to come to us in settings where we control the environment and format, what if designers attended existing community gatherings, church events, school functions, neighborhood celebrations, and engaged on their terms, in their spaces? Layla's eyes lit up. That's exactly the kind of approach we need. The design expertise integrated with community wisdom, rather than imposed upon it. By afternoon, I found myself fully engaged in brainstorming with the team, offering perspectives from both my design background and community volunteer experience. Ideas flowed with increasing energy, building on each other's insights rather than competing for prominence. A stark contrast to the positioning and credit claiming I'd witnessed in Nathan's professional circles. "This is exactly why we need you here," Marcus said quietly as we watched the team compile our collective input into revised community engagement strategies. "You bridge worlds that too often remain separated, design excellence and community authenticity." At day's end, as the team dispersed and the office quieted, Marcus invited me to his office to discuss next steps. The space reflected his approach to leadership: organized but not rigid, personal without being self-aggrandizing, focused on work rather than status display. "So," he began once we were seated, "what are your thoughts after today's immersion?" I considered carefully before responding. "I'm impressed by your team's genuine commitment to both design quality and community impact. The collaborative culture you've built is remarkable, especially in an industry often driven by individual creative egos." Marcus nodded, seeming pleased by the observation. "That culture is intentional but fragile. It needs nurturing from leadership committed to both creative excellence and human values." He leaned forward slightly. "Which brings me to the role," I mentioned. Director of Community Design Initiatives would be a new position, created specifically to bridge our design practice with deeper community engagement. He outlined the parameters: a leadership role with both creative and strategic dimensions, overseeing a small team while maintaining hands-on involvement with key projects, focusing particularly on initiatives serving historically marginalized communities. The salary would be comparable to what you'd earn as a creative director at a traditional agency, he added, naming a figure that was surprisingly generous, though still less than I would receive through my divorce settlement. "But I suspect the real appeal might be the opportunity to reconnect with your original professional passions while creating meaningful impact." His perception was unnervingly accurate. The role he described aligned perfectly with ambitions I'd held before gradually subordinating my professional identity to support Nathan's career. Ambitions I was only now rediscovering after years of dimming my own light to help his shine brighter. "I'm genuinely interested," I admitted. "But I should be transparent about my current situation. I'm in the midst of divorce proceedings that will likely continue for several months, and I'm considering a significant property purchase that would require substantial focus during the transition period." Rather than appearing concerned by these complications, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Life rarely arranges itself into neat sequential chapters. We could structure the role with a phased entry, perhaps beginning with project-specific consultation as you navigate these other priorities, transitioning to full-time leadership as your situation stabilizes." The flexibility he offered, the recognition that my life contained multiple important dimensions rather than just professional ambitions, contrasted sharply with Nathan's approach to career advancement, which had always prioritized work above all other considerations. "That's extremely generous," I said, genuinely moved by his willingness to accommodate my complex circumstances. "It's also self-interested," Marcus acknowledged with a smile. "You bring a perspective and skill set we need. I'd rather create a structure that works for your life than lose the opportunity to bring you on board." As I drove home that evening, the setting sun casting Portland's bridges in golden light, I found myself in the unfamiliar but exhilarating position of having multiple compelling options before me, professionally, personally, and financially. For years, my primary role had been supporting Nathan's ambitions, making accommodations that enhanced his success while gradually setting aside my own desires and dreams. Now, I faced decisions that centered entirely on my own well-being, my own values, my own future. The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. I had no roadmap for this territory, no familiarity with making major life decisions, without filtering them through their impact on Nathan's goals or comfort. At home, I kicked off my shoes and moved to the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine before settling on the balcony overlooking Portland's twinkling lights. My phone chimed with an incoming text from Grace. Nathan's lawyer called. They want to schedule mediation next week. Also heard from Victor, owners receptive to exploration of offer. Call me tomorrow to discuss both. The message brought the weight of pending decisions into sharp focus. Proceeding with an offer on Waterfall Estate would commit a substantial portion of my financial resources, potentially limiting other options. Accepting Marcus's job offer would reorient my daily life around professional identity I'd set aside years ago. Both choices would fundamentally reshape my post-Nathan existence, in ways that felt both exhilarating and daunting. As the evening breeze carried the scent of nearby gardens to my balcony, I realized I was experiencing something I hadn't felt in years: the particular anxiety and excitement that accompanies genuine agency. The knowledge that my choices would determine my path forward rather than simply accommodating someone else's journey. For the first time since Nathan walked out, I felt not just the pain of what had ended, but the promise of what might begin. The first stirrings of a future shaped by my own hands, reflecting my own values, nurturing my own growth. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with decisions still unmade and challenges not yet faced. But it was undeniably, irrevocably mine. The mediation room at Grace's law firm felt deliberately neutral, neither too comfortable nor too sterile, designed to facilitate difficult conversations without amplifying emotions. I sat beside Grace at one side of a polished conference table, watching sunlight filter through partially closed blinds to create bands of light and shadow across the room's muted gray walls. Across from us, Nathan and his attorney, Richard Dalton, arranged documents with practiced efficiency. Nathan wore the expression I recognized from countless business negotiations, a careful blend of confidence and approachability that revealed nothing of his actual thoughts or feelings. He'd chosen his dark blue suit, the one he considered his closer outfit for particularly important deals. "Thank you all for agreeing to this mediation session," began Marianne Weiss, the court-appointed mediator whose silver hair and direct gaze suggested both experience and no tolerance for games. "Our goal today is to find common ground that might allow us to resolve your divorce settlement without protracted litigation, which benefits neither party." I nodded my agreement, noticing Nathan do the same with the precise timing he employed. When mirroring potential investors, a technique he'd once explained created subconscious alignment. "I've reviewed the proposals from both sides," Marianne continued, "and while there are significant disparities in your positions, I believe we can identify areas for productive compromise." For the next hour, Grace and Richard outlined their respective positions, while Marianne asked clarifying questions and occasionally suggested potential middle ground. Nathan remained largely silent, contributing only when directly addressed, another negotiation tactic I recognized from observing his business dealings. By appearing reasonable and somewhat detached, he created pressure for others to close the gaps. "The fundamental disagreement," Grace explained, centers on the valuation of Mitchell Tech during the marriage and Ms. Mitchell's contributions to its growth. Our position is that the company's success was facilitated by significant tangible and intangible support provided by my client over 15 years. Richard countered with practiced smoothness. While we don't dispute that Mrs. Mitchell was a supportive spouse, the company's valuation reflects Mr. Mitchell's expertise, innovation, and business acumen. The current settlement offer already exceeds standard divisions in similar cases. Standard cases don't typically involve one spouse abandoning their own career trajectory to support the other's business development, Grace replied, without heat, but with unmistakable precision. As they continued their practiced legal volleys, I found my attention drawn to Nathan himself. Sitting across from him in this formal setting, I realized how differently I now saw the man I'd been married to for 15 years. The confidence I had once found magnetic now appeared calculated. The strategic silences that had seemed thoughtful now revealed themselves as manipulative. The careful image management that I'd admired as professionalism now struck me as performative. When had I stopped seeing him clearly? Or had I always seen but chosen to interpret his characteristics in the most flattering light, crafting a narrative that justified my own choices and accommodations? Ms. Mitchell, Marianne's voice broke through my reverie. I'd like to hear directly from you about what you consider most important in reaching a fair settlement. The question caught me slightly off guard. I had prepared for the financial and legal aspects of the mediation, but hadn't anticipated being asked to articulate my personal priorities so directly. Financial fairness is important, I began carefully. But equally significant is recognition of the partnership nature of our marriage. For 15 years, I subordinated my own professional development to support Nathan's business growth, hosting clients, managing our social connections, creating the stable home environment that allowed him to focus entirely on his company. I met Nathan's gaze directly. That was a choice we made together, with the understanding that we were building a shared future. When that future dissolved, it shouldn't erase the value of those contributions. Nathan shifted almost imperceptibly in his chair, a subtle tell I recognized from years of watching him when conversations turned in directions he hadn't anticipated. I appreciate your perspective, Marianne said, turning to Nathan. Mr. Mitchell, would you like to respond? Nathan cleared his throat, assuming the reasonable tone he employed when wanting to appear objective despite holding an entrenched position. I've never denied that Elena was supportive during our marriage, he began. The settlement offer reflects that support, but the growth of Mitchell Tech resulted primarily from my innovation, my risk-taking, my business strategies. Elena chose to focus on her teaching and volunteer work rather than pursuing more ambitious career options. That was her decision, just as departing our marriage was mine. The casual dismissal of 15 years, reducing my contributions to optional support and characterizing his abandonment as a simple decision, sparked something unexpected inside me. Not the hurt or resentment I might have felt weeks ago, but a clarity so sharp it was almost exhilarating. Nathan, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. For 15 years, you've framed our relationship as a partnership when it served your interests and as separate paths when it didn't. You've categorized my contributions as peripheral when they were central to creating the conditions for your success. I leaned forward slightly. But this isn't about convincing you of my value. It's about establishing an equitable division of what we built together, whether you choose to acknowledge my role or not. Nathan's expression flickered with something between surprise and discomfort. In our marriage, I had rarely challenged him so directly, gradually learning to modulate my disagreements into suggestions or questions that preserved his sense of authority. I think we've established the philosophical differences in your perspectives, Marianne intervened smoothly. Let's focus on specific areas where compromise might be possible. The discussion shifted to more concrete matters: division of retirement accounts, ownership of our Pearl District home, allocation of investment portfolios. Throughout, I noticed Nathan watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between calculation and genuine puzzlement, as if encountering a familiar landscape suddenly altered by an earthquake. When we broke for lunch, Grace squeezed my arm as we stepped into the hallway. "You're doing extraordinarily well," she said quietly. "Particularly that moment when you directly addressed the partnership issue. Mediators notice those authentic moments. They cut through the legal positioning." I nodded, feeling strangely energized despite the emotional weight of the proceedings. I expected to feel more. Rattled, I admitted. But sitting across from him, I keep seeing patterns I never fully acknowledged before. "Distance provides perspective," Grace observed, "both emotional and temporal." We settled in a small conference room with the lunch Grace's assistant had arranged, discussing strategy for the afternoon session. As we were finishing, my phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Owners reviewing preliminary offer letter. Looking positive. Call when you can." Grace noticed my expression change as I read the message. "News about Waterfall Estate?" "Victor. Says the owners are reviewing my offer," I confirmed, a flutter of both excitement and trepidation rising in my chest. Grace nodded approvingly. "Perfect timing, actually. Nothing reinforces your autonomy in this process like parallel developments that don't involve Nathan at all." When we returned to the mediation room, I felt a subtle shift in the dynamics. Nathan appeared slightly less composed, checking his phone repeatedly before we resumed and exchanging whispered comments with Richard that seemed to carry an urgency absent from the morning's proceedings. As the afternoon session progressed through detailed financial discussions, I noticed Nathan's attention repeatedly drifting, his responses becoming less measured. Finally, during a discussion of art and furnishings division, he interrupted with uncharacteristic abruptness. "Is it true you've made an offer on Waterfall Estate?" he asked, abandoning all pretense of addressing his comments through the mediator. The directness of the question created a momentary silence in the room. I met his gaze steadily. "My personal real estate interests aren't relevant to our divorce proceedings," I replied, maintaining the professional tone we'd established for the mediation. "They are if you're using assets that should be part of our settlement discussions," Nathan countered, an edge entering his voice. "Ms. Mitchell's financial resources for any property purchase have been fully disclosed in our filings," Grace interjected smoothly. "Her grandmother's trust is separate property, established prior to the marriage and maintained independently throughout." Nathan's expression tightened. "You know I've been planning to acquire that property for years." "Yes," I acknowledged, keeping my voice level despite the satisfaction warming my chest. "You mentioned your interest in it quite clearly the day you left our marriage." Richard placed a cautioning hand on Nathan's arm, murmuring something I couldn't hear. Nathan visibly collected himself, resuming his carefully constructed reasonableness. But I had glimpsed what lay beneath. Genuine distress at the prospect of losing something he believed should rightfully be his. "Perhaps we should return to the settlement discussion," Marianne suggested, her neutral tone belied by the evaluating look she cast between Nathan and me. The remainder of the session proceeded with renewed focus on financial details, but the underlying current had shifted. Nathan's reaction to my potential purchase of Waterfall Estate had revealed something crucial. Despite his measured demeanor and strategic approach to the divorce, emotional triggers remained. He had not anticipated my pursuing independent ambitions that might directly intersect with his own plans. By late afternoon, we had reached tentative agreement on several key aspects of the settlement. Though significant issues remained unresolved, Marianne expressed cautious optimism about our progress. "I believe we've established a framework for continued productive negotiations," she concluded. "I'll draft a summary of today's agreements and outstanding issues for review before our next session." As we gathered our belongings, Nathan approached while Grace was speaking with Richard across the room. "Elena," he said, his voice lowered for privacy, About Waterfall Estate. You can't seriously be considering purchasing it yourself. I met his gaze directly, noting the complex emotion behind his carefully controlled expression. Why not? He began, then stopped, seeming to realize there was no reasonable completion to that sentence. It doesn't make practical sense for you. It's too large, too expensive to maintain, too isolated. The familiar pattern of his reasoning, presenting his preferences as objective practicalities, struck me with its transparent self-interest. Those are assessments I'm capable of making for myself, I replied calmly, just as you're making them with Rebecca. He flinched slightly at the direct reference to his new relationship. This isn't about Rebecca. No, I agreed. It's about you assuming I wouldn't or shouldn't want something simply because you want it for yourself. Nathan studied me, genuine puzzlement entering his expression. You've never expressed interest in Waterfall Estate before. I expressed interest in many things over the years, Nathan. You just stopped listening. I gathered my portfolio, preparing to join Grace by the door. Perhaps I stopped speaking up as well. That's changing now. As Grace and I walked to the elevator, she cast me an appraising look. That went significantly better than expected, she observed, particularly that final exchange. It felt different, I acknowledged, facing him directly without the constraints of our marriage, without worrying about his reaction or adjusting myself to maintain his comfort. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, its doors opening to reveal polished brass and wood paneling. As we stepped inside, Grace smiled with professional satisfaction. That, she said as the doors closed, is exactly what successful mediation looks like from my perspective. Not just financial equity, but reclaiming your own authority in the relationship. Outside, Portland's early summer evening offered perfect golden light as I headed to my car. Before starting the engine, I called Victor to discuss the status of my offer on Waterfall Estate. Elena, he greeted me warmly. Perfect timing. I've just heard from the owner's representative. They're receptive to your proposal, with a few minor modifications to the terms. As Victor outlined the requested adjustments, primarily related to closing timeline rather than purchase price, I felt a curious certainty settling over me. This property, which had once represented Nathan's aspirational trophy, was transforming in my mind into something more personal, a space for my own reinvention, a physical manifestation of my emerging independence. The modifications seem reasonable. I agreed after Victor finished his explanation. What are our next steps? I'll prepare a revised offer letter incorporating these adjustments, Victor replied. With your approval, we could potentially have a signed purchase agreement by early next week. The timeline was accelerated, but not unreasonable. With Grace's guidance, I had already confirmed that my financial resources, combining my grandmother's trust with the divorce settlement progress we'd made today, would support this acquisition without reckless risk. Let's proceed, I decided, surprising myself with the absence of hesitation in my voice. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone rang through the car's speaker system. Sophia, calling with her impeccable timing for significant moments. How was mediation with Satan? She asked when I answered. I laughed despite myself. Surprisingly productive, and more revealing than I expected. Revealing how? Sophia's interest sharpened. Nathan's carefully constructed reasonableness cracked when he learned about my interest in Waterfall Estate, I explained, navigating toward the Fremont Bridge. It was illuminating to see him respond to being on the receiving end of unexpected developments. Tell me you got the house, Sophia demanded. Not officially yet, but it's looking promising, I admitted. The owners are receptive to my offer with some timeline adjustments. Victor thinks we could have a signed agreement next week. Sophia's whoop of delight was so loud I had to adjust the speaker volume. This is the most magnificent power move in divorce history, she declared. I'm coming over with champagne. This deserves celebration. I hesitated, sudden exhaustion washing over me as the adrenaline of the day's confrontations began to recede. Can we make it tomorrow? I think I need a quiet evening to process everything that happened today. Sophia's tone softened immediately. Of course. Self-care is sacred, but I'm bringing extra expensive champagne tomorrow to make up for the delay. After ending the call, I continued driving across the Fremont Bridge, Portland's downtown skyline glittering in the early evening light to my right, while the West Hills rose to my left. Somewhere in those hills, Waterfall Estate waited, its gardens and historic rooms potentially becoming the setting for my next chapter. The thought carried both exhilaration and a thread of anxiety. This contemplated purchase represented the largest independent decision I'd made in 15 years. A commitment to myself, to my future, to a vision that originated wholly from my own desires rather than accommodation of someone else's dreams. At home, I kicked off my heels and changed from my mediation attire into comfortable clothes, pouring a glass of wine before stepping onto my balcony. The city spread before me, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk gathered. My phone chimed with an email notification from Marcus, a follow-up to our meeting at P&W Creative Solutions with a formal offer letter for the Director of Community Design Initiatives position. I opened the attachment, scanning the details with growing appreciation for the opportunity it represented. The role combined creative leadership with community impact, offering both professional advancement and meaningful purpose. The proposed compensation, while less than what I would receive from my divorce settlement, would provide ongoing financial independence beyond my existing resources. Most significantly, the position aligned with professional ambitions I'd held before gradually, setting them aside to support Nathan's career, ambitions I was only now rediscovering after years of diminishment. I closed the email without immediately responding, needing time to consider how this opportunity fit with my other evolving plans. If I purchased Waterfall Estate and accepted the position at P&W, I would be committing to a completely transformed life. New home, new career, new identity separate from the one I'd constructed as Nathan's wife. The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. For so long, my choices had been made within the context of our marriage, filtered through consideration of Nathan's preferences and priorities. Now I faced decisions that centered entirely on my own well-being, my own values, my own future. My phone rang again, Nathan's number appearing on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, then decided against avoidance. Whatever he wanted to say, I could receive it from my own center of gravity, rather than the orbit I'd maintained around him for 15 years. "Hello, Nathan," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Elena." His tone carried uncharacteristic hesitation. I wanted to continue our conversation from earlier, about Waterfall Estate. I waited, offering no assistance to ease the uncomfortable silence that followed. "I've been pursuing that property for years," he finally continued. "It represents a significant milestone for me professionally and personally. Your sudden interest feels targeted." The familiar pattern of his reasoning, centering his perspective and interpreting my actions solely in relation to their impact on him, was so transparent it almost made me smile. "My interest isn't sudden," I corrected, gently. "I've always appreciated the property's architectural integrity and gardens. The timing of my pursuit is circumstantial, the result of learning it would soon be available and recognizing I now have both the resources and the freedom to consider such an acquisition." "You never mentioned wanting a property like that?" "Before," Nathan countered, frustration edging into his voice. "I expressed interest in many things over the years that didn't align with your vision for our life together," I replied. "Eventually, I stopped expressing those interests when it became clear they wouldn't be accommodated." Another silence, longer this time. When Nathan spoke again, his tone had shifted to the conciliatory approach he employed when standard tactics failed. I understand this is a difficult time for both of us, he said carefully. The end of a marriage carries emotional complications that can influence decision-making. I'm concerned you might be pursuing Waterfall Estate as a reaction rather than a genuine desire. The condescension in his framing, positioning himself as the rational actor while characterizing my choices as emotionally reactive, was so familiar it was almost comforting in its predictability. That's a reasonable concern, I acknowledged, surprising him with agreement. I've considered it carefully myself, but upon reflection, I'm pursuing this property because it genuinely resonates with my aesthetic values, practical needs, and vision for my future. That this happens to intersect with your interests is coincidental, though I understand why you might see it otherwise. Elena, be reasonable, Nathan said, abandoning pretense as frustration overtook strategy. You don't need a property of that size or prominence. It makes no practical sense for your situation. Perhaps practicality isn't my only consideration, I replied calmly. Perhaps, after 15 years of practical accommodations to your preferences, I'm allowing myself to pursue something simply because it brings me joy. The concept seemed to genuinely confound him. In our marriage, major decisions had always been justified through logical frameworks and strategic advantages, approaches that had gradually centralized Nathan's preferences while marginalizing mine under the guise of objectivity. What if we discussed a cooperative approach? He suggested, shifting to negotiation mode. A joint investment in Waterfall Estate with defined usage agreements. It could benefit us both financially while preventing unnecessary competitive bidding. The proposal was so characteristic of Nathan's approach to conflict. Find the business solution, the rational compromise that preserved his essential interests while appearing magnanimous. I appreciate the suggestion, I said carefully, but I'm pursuing this property as my primary residence, not an investment. A shared ownership arrangement wouldn't serve that purpose. You're really going to live there? Alone? Disbelief colored his tone. I'm really going to live there, I confirmed. Whether alone or eventually with chosen companions remains to be seen. The future holds many possibilities I'm just beginning to explore. The line went quiet again, Nathan apparently processing this definitive rejection of his proposed compromise. I don't understand what's happened to you, he finally said, genuine confusion evident beneath his frustration. You've never been this inflexible. The observation startled a laugh from me, not bitter or mocking, but genuinely amused at his perception. I've always been flexible, Nathan, I corrected gently. For 15 years, I bent myself around your ambitions, your preferences, your vision for our life together. What you're experiencing now isn't my inflexibility, but rather the absence of my accommodation. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, more final, as if something fundamental had shifted between us. I need to consider next steps, Nathan finally said, his tone carefully controlled again. This development changes the context of our settlement discussions. My pursuit of Waterfall Estate has no direct bearing on our divorce proceedings, I reminded him. The financial resources I'm utilizing have been fully disclosed in our filings, and their separate status established. It's not about the financial technicalities, Nathan replied. It's about the nature of our negotiations moving forward. The implicit threat was clear. If I persisted in pursuing something he wanted for himself, he would make the divorce process more difficult. It was the same basic dynamic that had shaped much of our marriage. My compliance rewarded with his reasonableness, my independence met with subtle penalties. That's your choice to make, I said simply. I hope we can continue the productive path we established in mediation today, but I'm prepared for other scenarios if necessary. After ending the call, I remained on the balcony, watching darkness settle over Portland as city lights defined neighborhoods and bridges in their absence. Nathan's reaction confirmed what I had begun to understand during our marriage's dissolution. His perception of me had always been filtered through my function in his life rather than recognition of my separate personhood. My phone chimed with a text from Grace. Nathan's lawyer called. Suddenly interested in expediting settlement. Let's talk tomorrow. The message brought a small smile to my lips. Nathan's shift to accelerating our divorce likely reflected strategic recalculation. If he couldn't prevent my acquisition of Waterfall Estate, perhaps he could finalize our settlement quickly enough to free his resources for a competitive counteroffer. The realization that I could now read his tactical maneuvers so clearly, patterns I had observed for years but interpreted through the lens of loving accommodation rather than clear-eyed assessment, brought a curious mixture of sadness and liberation. The following morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through blinds I had opened fully the night before. Another small rebellion against Nathan's preference for precisely controlled natural light. The day ahead held significant conversations. A scheduled call with Grace to discuss Nathan's sudden interest in expediting our settlement, a final review of the revised offer for Waterfall Estate with Victor, and a promised response to Marcus regarding the position at PNW Creative Solutions. As I prepared breakfast, actually cooking rather than assembling the efficient, nutrition-optimized meals Nathan had preferred, I found myself contemplating these converging decision points with surprising clarity. Each represented a facet of reclaiming agency I had gradually surrendered during 15 years of marriage: financial independence, physical space reflecting my own aesthetic, and professional identity aligned with my values rather than someone else's convenience. The doorbell rang as I was finishing my coffee. Sophia, arriving earlier than expected with the promised champagne and an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have news," she announced, setting the bottle on my counter and fixing me with an intent gaze. Major news about Nathan and Rebecca. "Should we really be drinking champagne before noon?" I asked, eyeing the bottle skeptically. "This isn't for celebrating yet," Sophia clarified. "This is for strategic intelligence briefing. Olivia from Cascade Venture Partners called me this morning. The firm has put their investment in Nathan's company under review following what they're calling concerning personal judgment patterns." I stared at her, processing the implications. Because of his relationship with Rebecca? "Partly," Sophia nodded. "Apparently there are ethical questions about their relationship's timeline, relative to her evaluation of his company for investment. But there's more. Cascade's senior partners are also expressing concerns about his reaction to your potential acquisition of Waterfall Estate." "His reaction? How would they even know about that?" Sophia's expression turned gleeful. "Because Nathan apparently called Taylor Jensen, Cascade's managing partner and Rebecca's boss, last night to see if the firm could help him secure Waterfall Estate before you could finalize your purchase. He positioned it as a strategic acquisition that would enhance the firm's investment in his company." The audacity was so characteristic of Nathan that I couldn't even summon surprise, only a weary recognition of his default approach to obstacles. Leverage relationships, reframe personal desires as strategic necessities, and assume his interests naturally aligned with those of potential allies. "Taylor was not impressed," Sophia continued, "particularly since one of Cascade's investment criteria is judgment and ethical decision-making under pressure. And apparently, using a professional investment relationship to intervene in a personal divorce dispute doesn't score well on that metric." I sat heavily on one of the kitchen stools, absorbing this development. So his attempt to outmaneuver me for Waterfall Estate has potentially jeopardized his company's funding? "Poetic justice at its finest," Sophia confirmed with satisfaction. "Olivia says Rebecca is furious, both professionally embarrassed and personally concerned about what this reveals about Nathan's judgment. They had a major argument last night that continued into this morning. The news should perhaps have brought vindictive pleasure, evidence that Nathan's carefully constructed new life was experiencing complications similar to those he had inflicted on me. Instead, I felt a curious detachment, as if observing the predictable consequence of patterns. I now recognized with clarity that had once been obscured by emotional entanglement. That explains his sudden interest in expediting our settlement, I observed. He needs to resolve our financial entanglements quickly to strengthen his position with Cascade before their review is complete. Sophia nodded approvingly. Look. At you, reading the strategic chessboard like a grandmaster. Nathan clearly underestimated who he was playing against. The metaphor struck me as both accurate and insufficient. This wasn't merely a game of strategy, though Nathan likely conceptualized it that way. It was something more fundamental, the painful but necessary disentangling of lives that had grown asymmetrically intertwined, one gradually subordinated to the other's rhythm and requirements. I never wanted to be his opponent, I said quietly. Even now, I'm not pursuing Waterfall Estate to defeat him. I'm pursuing it because it represents something I genuinely want for myself, independent of its significance to him. Sophia's expression softened as she reached across the counter to squeeze my hand. I know. That's what makes this so powerfully different from how he operates. You're reclaiming your right to want things, to pursue things, to own things, not as reactions to him, but as expressions of who you are. Her articulation of this crucial distinction brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of being truly seen and understood after years of gradual invisibility. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. Victor. Henderson's name appearing on the screen. I should take this, I said, composing myself. It's probably about the revised offer for Waterfall Estate. Sophia nodded encouragingly as I answered, her presence a silent affirmation of support through whatever came next. Elena, Victor greeted me, his tone warm but professionally measured. I've received the owner's response to our revised offer, and I believe we have good news. They've accepted our offer, Victor continued, his measured tone containing a hint of genuine pleasure. With all the terms we proposed in the revision, they appreciate your flexibility on the closing timeline and the earnest money demonstration of your serious intent. I gripped the phone tighter, barely registering Sophia's questioning gaze across the kitchen counter. That's wonderful, I managed, the simple words inadequate for the complex emotions flooding through me. What happens next? We'll move directly to the purchase agreement, Victor explained. I've already drafted it based on our discussions. I can email it within the hour for your review, and if everything meets your approval, we could have signatures as early as tomorrow. Tomorrow, I echoed, the immediacy suddenly making this abstract possibility concrete in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. The current owners are motivated to proceed quickly, Victor confirmed. They've already found their next property and are eager to complete both transactions in parallel. Once signed, we'd move to the inspection phase, though they've provided comprehensive documentation from the renovations that should minimize concerns. As Victor continued outlining the process ahead, financing confirmation, title search, closing procedures, I found myself standing straighter, as if physically embodying the decision I was making. This wasn't an impulsive choice or reactive gesture. It was a deliberate step toward the life I was choosing for myself, a life defined by my own preferences and values rather than accommodation of someone else's vision. I'll review the agreement as soon as you send it, I assured Victor, and I'll coordinate with Grace to ensure everything aligns with our ongoing settlement discussions. After ending the call, I looked up to find Sophia watching me with barely contained anticipation. Well? She demanded. They accepted the offer, I confirmed, a smile spreading across my face. The purchase agreement could be signed as early as tomorrow. Sophia's whoop of excitement echoed through my kitchen as she rushed around the counter to embrace me. This calls for immediate champagne, regardless of the hour, she declared, reaching for the bottle she'd brought. You're buying a mansion. Elena, a literal mansion that your ex wanted for himself and his child bride. I laughed despite myself, the joy of this moment too genuine to be diminished by lingering pain. It's not about Nathan, I reminded her, though the satisfaction of outmaneuvering him couldn't be entirely denied. It's about me choosing something I truly want. Exactly, Sophia agreed, expertly opening the champagne with a restrained pop. That's precisely what makes this so delicious. You're not doing this to spite him. You're doing it because you genuinely want this for yourself. The fact that it happens to drive him absolutely insane is just the cherry on top of your empowerment sundae. As we clinked glasses in celebration, my phone chimed with an incoming email. The purchase agreement from Victor, arriving with characteristic efficiency. Before I could open it, another notification appeared. A message from Marcus at PNW Creative Solutions asking if we could speak briefly about the position offer. The convergence of these significant decision points, Waterfall Estate, the PNW, position, our accelerating divorce settlement, created a momentary sense of vertigo, as if standing at the intersection of multiple possible futures. For so long, my choices had been made within the narrow parameters of what complemented Nathan's preferences. Now, I faced an abundance of possibilities entirely my own. You look like someone contemplating the weight of freedom, Sophia observed, her perception uncomfortably accurate as always. I'm not used to making so many significant decisions simultaneously, I admitted. For years, the major directional choices in my life were effectively made by Nathan's priorities. And now everything's happening at once, Sophia nodded sympathetically. House, job, divorce, all converging in a perfect storm of adulting. I took a fortifying sip of champagne. Marcus wants to talk about the position at PNW. I need to give him an answer soon. And? Are you going to take it? Sophia's directness cut through my hesitation. I think I want to, I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke it aloud. The role aligns perfectly with what I originally wanted to do before setting aside my career for Nathan's, but combining that with purchasing Waterfall Estate and finalizing the divorce, it's a lot of significant change all at once. Sophia studied me over the rim of her glass. Maybe that's exactly what makes it right. A clean break from one life, a clear beginning of another. No half measures or gradual transitions where old patterns might creep back in. Before I could respond, my phone rang again, Grace's name appearing on the screen. I should take this, I said, setting down my champagne. She's probably calling about Nathan's sudden interest in expediting the settlement. Sophia nodded, moving to refill her glass as I answered. Elena, Grace greeted me, her tone carrying a note of satisfaction that immediately piqued my interest. I've just had an illuminating conversation with Richard Dalton. It seems Nathan is now eager to conclude our settlement negotiations promptly and with terms significantly more favorable to you than his previous position. How significantly? I asked, catching Sophia's questioning gaze and mouthing, divorce. Settlement, to explain the call. He's accepting our valuation of Mitchell Tech for purposes of the division, granting you full ownership of the Pearl District property with no offset against other assets, and agreeing to the maintenance payments we requested, Grace detailed with professional precision. In essence, he's conceding to approximately 80% of our position. I absorbed this information with growing amazement. Nathan's sudden capitulation represented a dramatic shift from his previous stance, one that could only be explained by external pressures creating greater urgency than winning advantageous terms. Sophia just informed me that Cascade Venture Partners has placed their investment in Nathan's company under review, I shared. Apparently, his attempt to leverage their relationship to secure Waterfall Estate raised ethical concerns about his judgment. That would certainly explain the abrupt change in negotiating position, Grace observed. He needs to resolve the divorce quickly to present a cleaner corporate governance picture to his investors. And to free his personal resources for a potential counteroffer on Waterfall Estate, I added. A counteroffer that would come too late if we've already secured the property, Grace noted. Victor called to update me on your accepted offer. The timing couldn't be more strategic if we'd planned it. The realization that circumstances had aligned so perfectly, my pursuit of Waterfall Estate strengthening my divorce position while simultaneously creating professional complications, for Nathan, carried a certain poetic justice that wasn't lost on me. Should we accept Nathan's concessions? I asked, focusing on the practical implications rather than emotional satisfaction. The terms are objectively favorable, Grace confirmed. Better than we might achieve through continued negotiation or litigation, and without the associated time and emotional costs. However, I'd like to review the specific language before finalizing. Richard is sending the draft agreement this afternoon. After concluding the call with Grace, I turned back to Sophia, who had clearly been listening intently to my side of the conversation. Nathan's caving on the settlement, I explained, the reality of this development still sinking in. Grace says he's accepting most of our terms. Because his little power play with Rebecca's firm backfired spectacularly, Sophia filled in with evident satisfaction. God, I love when the universe delivers karma with such precision. I smiled despite myself, though the emotion I felt wasn't quite the vindictive pleasure Sophia's expression suggested. There was satisfaction, certainly, but mingled with a strange tenderness for the man I had once loved, a man whose patterns of behavior had become so transparent to me now, viewed from beyond the emotional entanglement of our marriage. I should call Marcus back, I said, glancing at my phone where the notification from PNW Creative Solutions still waited. And review Victor's purchase agreement. If everything is moving forward simultaneously, I need to ensure all the pieces align. Sophia nodded, gathering her things. This is your moment, Elena. All these opportunities converging at once isn't coincidence. It's the universe conspiring to help you create your next chapter. She picked up her camera bag, slinging it over her shoulder. I'm shooting a wedding. At Riverfront Gardens this afternoon, but call me the second anything develops. And by anything, I mean everything. After Sophia left, I moved to my home office, a space that had gradually transformed since Nathan's departure from the austere productivity zone he'd designed to a warmer environment reflecting my emerging preferences. Plants now adorned the windowsills. Art I'd created or collected over the years hung on walls previously kept deliberately bare, and comfortable seating invited lingering rather than efficient task completion. I opened Victor's email first, reviewing the purchase agreement for Waterfall Estate with careful attention to details. The terms aligned with our discussions: purchase price, earnest money, inspection contingencies, closing timeline. With my grandmother's trust and the settlement terms Grace was finalizing, the financial aspects were solidly manageable. Next, I called Marcus at PNW Creative Solutions, curious about what additional aspects of the position offer he wanted to discuss. Elena, he greeted me warmly when he answered. Thanks for getting back to me so quickly. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the director role and propose a slight modification to the structure we discussed. What kind of modification? I asked, settling into my desk chair. After our team's discussion of the riverfront project, we've identified an immediate need for the kind of community engagement approach you suggested, Marcus explained. Rather than waiting for you to complete your transition period, we'd like to bring you on as a consultant specifically for this initiative, starting next week if possible. This would allow you to begin contributing immediately while still maintaining the flexibility you need during your personal transitions. The proposal was thoughtfully calibrated to align with my current circumstances, offering professional engagement without demanding immediate full-time commitment during a period of significant personal change. I'd be open to that arrangement, I said, finding myself genuinely excited by the prospect of reconnecting with creative work that had meaning beyond Nathan's orbit. It would give us both an opportunity to determine if the full-time role is the right fit going forward. Exactly, Marcus agreed. No pressure to commit to the directorship until you've had a chance to work with the team, and we've all confirmed the alignment we believe exists. After discussing specific details of the consulting arrangement, schedule, compensation, project parameters, I ended the call with a growing sense of optimism about this professional possibility. Unlike the total absorption that had characterized my support of Nathan's career, this opportunity offered engagement without demanding the subordination of my entire identity to its requirements. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of communication and coordination, reviewing settlement terms with Grace, finalizing the purchase agreement with Victor, and confirming consulting arrangements with Marcus. Each conversation represented a strand in the new life I was weaving, a life structured around my own choices rather than accommodation of someone else's vision. By evening, I had signed the purchase agreement for Waterfall Estate, officially initiating my claim to the property Nathan had coveted throughout our marriage. The act of signing, my name alone on documents committing to this significant acquisition, carried a weight beyond the considerable financial investment it represented. It was perhaps the most tangible declaration yet of my reclaimed agency, my willingness to pursue what I wanted without seeking permission or approval. As twilight settled over Portland, I walked through my Pearl District home, soon to be my former home, with a curious blend of nostalgia and anticipation. Each room held memories of the life I had shared with Nathan, yet increasingly showed evidence of my emerging independent identity. The furniture I had rearranged for comfort rather than appearance, the art I had hung that reflected my aesthetic rather than his, the flowers from the farmer's market brightening spaces once kept deliberately austere. My phone chimed with a text message, Nathan, his name appearing on my screen, still capable of triggering a complex emotional response despite everything that had transpired. Heard you signed purchase agreement for Waterfall Estate today. We should talk. Dinner tomorrow? The usual place, 7 p.m. The usual place referred to Reed's, the upscale restaurant where we had celebrated special occasions throughout our marriage. His presumption that I would agree to meet, that I would prioritize his preferred time and location, that our previous patterns of interaction remained valid despite the profound changes in our relationship, was so characteristic I almost smiled at its predictability. I considered declining, then decided against avoidance. This conversation would happen eventually, whether tomorrow or later. Better to engage from my current position of clarity and strength than postpone until circumstances might be less favorable. I can meet at Reed's tomorrow, I texted back, but 6 p.m. works better for my schedule. The small but deliberate modification of his suggested time, asserting my own preference rather than automatically accommodating his, felt like another tiny declaration of independence. His response came almost immediately. 6 p.m. works. See you then. The brevity suggested irritation at my counteroffer, another familiar pattern from our marriage, when even minor deviations from his expectations were often met with subtle displays of displeasure designed to encourage future compliance. The following evening, I arrived at Reed's precisely at 6, having chosen my outfit with deliberate care, a dress I had purchased since Nathan's departure, in a bold emerald shade he would have deemed attention-seeking during our marriage. The restaurant's soft lighting and intimate atmosphere had once felt romantic. Now it struck me as somewhat performative in its carefully calculated sophistication. Nathan was already seated at our table, the corner banquette he preferred, for its privacy and subtle status signaling to other diners. He rose as I approached, his expression carefully neutral, though I could read the tension in his posture, the slight tightness around his eyes that signaled stress beneath his composed exterior. "Elena?" He greeted me, his gaze taking in my appearance, with barely concealed surprise. "You look different." "Thank you," I replied simply, sliding into the banquette without waiting for his assistance, another small departure from our established patterns. Nathan signaled for the server, ordering his usual scotch before looking to me expectantly. In the past, I would have selected white wine to complement whatever he chose. Tonight, I ordered a bourbon I had discovered since his departure. One, recommended by Sophia during a girls' night I would never have attended during my marriage. "You're drinking bourbon now?" Nathan asked, his tone suggesting this simple preference somehow represented a fundamental shift in identity. "I'm trying new things," I acknowledged. "Finding out what I actually enjoy rather than what I've habitually chosen." A flicker of something, discomfort perhaps, or genuine puzzlement, crossed his expression before he settled into the business-like demeanor he adopted for difficult conversations. "I understand congratulations are in order," he began once our drinks arrived. "You've secured Waterfall Estate." "The purchase agreement is signed," I confirmed. "There are still inspections and closing procedures ahead. But yes, it appears I'll be the next owner." Nathan studied me over the rim of his glass. "May I ask why?" The question seemed genuine rather than rhetorical. Not an accusation, but an actual inquiry. For perhaps the first time since our separation, he appeared to be seeking understanding, rather than advancing an agenda. "Because it's beautiful," I answered honestly. "Because the architecture speaks to me, the craftsmanship, the thoughtful integration with its natural setting, the sense of history and continuity. Because the gardens offer both structure and wildness in perfect balance. Because the moment I stood on that stone terrace watching sunlight play through the waterfall, I felt at home in a way I haven't experienced in a very long time." My answer: its emotional authenticity, its lack of strategic positioning, seemed to catch him off guard. He had likely anticipated some combination of financial justification and subtle revenge motivation, frameworks that would fit his understanding of decision-making. "I see," he said, though his expression suggested the opposite. "It's a significant undertaking for one person. The maintenance alone is well within my financial capacity," I finished for him, "as are the property taxes, utilities, and occasional updating such a historic home requires. I've done the calculations thoroughly, Nathan. This isn't an impulsive decision." He nodded slowly, accepting this assertion with apparent reluctance. "And the position at P&W Creative Solutions? Sophia mentioned they've created a role specifically for you." Of course Sophia had mentioned it, likely deliberately, knowing the information would reach Nathan through their overlapping social circles. "I'm beginning as a consultant on their Riverfront Community project," I confirmed, "with potential to transition to a directorship overseeing community-focused initiatives." "That's ambitious," Nathan observed, the word choice revealing more than perhaps he intended. Throughout our marriage, ambitious had been reserved for his pursuits. My activities categorized instead as interests or commitments, regardless of their scope or impact. "It aligns with professional goals I held before our lives took a different direction," I said carefully. "The opportunity to reconnect with that path is meaningful to me." A silence settled between us. Not the comfortable quiet of long time companions, but the weighted pause of two people reassessing their understanding of each other. "You've changed," Nathan finally said, the observation carrying a note of genuine bewilderment rather than accusation. "Not changed," I corrected gently. "Returned to aspects of myself that were gradually set aside during our marriage." Nathan's expression shifted, a fleeting vulnerability appearing before his practiced composure reasserted itself. "I never asked you to set those aspects aside." "Not explicitly," I acknowledged, "but our life together gradually oriented around your preferences, your priorities, your definition of success. Small accommodations accumulated over time until they became complete reorientations of my own desires and ambitions." "That wasn't my intention," he said, discomfort evident in his posture. "I know," I replied, surprising myself with the genuine absence of bitterness in my tone. "And it wasn't a deliberate surrender on my part. We both participated in creating that dynamic, you by expecting certain accommodations, me by offering them without sufficient awareness of their cumulative impact. Our server approached, inquiring about dinner selections. The interruption provided a welcome pause in our increasingly profound conversation. We ordered, Nathan selecting his usual steak, medium rare, while I chose a seafood dish I had always been curious about but had never ordered during our marriage because Nathan found its presentation unnecessarily fussy. When we were alone again, Nathan leaned forward slightly, his expression more open than I had seen since before our separation. "I received the revised settlement agreement from Richard today," he said. "Grace has negotiated very effectively, on your behalf." "She has," I agreed, neither apologizing for nor gloating about the favorable terms. "I've approved the revisions," Nathan continued. "The financial division, property allocations, everything. We could finalize within weeks, assuming you're also satisfied with the terms." His tone suggested this concession represented considerable magnanimity on his part, rather than a strategic necessity driven by his investor complications, another familiar pattern from our marriage, where compromises were framed as generous accommodations rather than equitable adjustments. "Grace believes the terms are fair," I said simply. "I'm inclined to accept them and move forward with finalizing the divorce." Nathan nodded, appearing relieved by my easy agreement. Perhaps he had anticipated greater resistance or emotional complication, reactions that would have characterized my response earlier in our separation when pain and betrayal still dominated my emotional landscape. "Things with Rebecca are—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the appropriate characterization. "Evolving." The deliberate vagueness suggested challenges in his new relationship, likely connected to the professional complications Sophia had mentioned regarding Cascade Venture Partners' investment review. I found myself neither pleased nor disturbed by this revelation, merely observant of its probable connection to his accelerated settlement approach. "I hope you find clarity in that situation," I offered, the words genuine rather than perfunctory. Whatever pain Nathan had caused me, I retained no desire for his unhappiness. Our meals arrived, temporarily shifting our focus to the culinary experience before us. The seafood dish I had selected proved delicious, complex flavors and textures, creating an experience far more satisfying than the predictable safe choices I had defaulted to during our marriage. "You seem content," Nathan observed after we had eaten in silence for several minutes. "Despite everything that's happened." The assessment surprised me with its accuracy. Content wasn't a word I would have chosen myself, and yet it captured precisely the quiet satisfaction I had begun to feel as my new life took shape. Not the giddy happiness of new romance, or the smug vindication of revenge, but something steadier and more sustainable. "I am," I acknowledged. "Not because our marriage ended, that still represents a profound loss, but because its ending has created space for me to rediscover parts of myself that had gradually disappeared." Nathan set down his fork, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Something between regret and recognition, perhaps. "I didn't see that happening," he said quietly. "Your disappearance." "Neither did I admitted. "It occurred so gradually, through countless small accommodations that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively transformed my relationship with myself and my own desires." "And now?" Nathan asked, genuine curiosity evident in his tone. "With Waterfall Estate and this new position at PNW, is this a return to who you were before we met?" I considered the question carefully, recognizing its uncharacteristic depth. Nathan had rarely inquired about my internal experience during our marriage, focusing instead on external markers of success and satisfaction. "Not a return," I clarified. "An integration of who I was before our marriage, what I learned during it, and who I'm discovering myself to be now that I'm making choices based solely on my own values and desires. Nathan nodded slowly, appearing to genuinely consider this perspective, rather than immediately countering with his own interpretation. Another departure from the conversational patterns that had characterized our marriage. I underestimated you, he said finally, the admission carrying no resentment or tactical positioning, merely a simple acknowledgement of fact. Yes, I agreed, meeting his gaze directly. You did. The remainder of our dinner progressed with unexpected ease, conversation shifting to more neutral topics, memories we shared without rancor, mutual acquaintances whose lives continued to intersect with ours despite our separation. By the time we finished our coffee, the tension that had marked the beginning of our meeting had largely dissipated, replaced by something approaching the companionable respect of former partners who had shared significant history. Outside the restaurant, the evening air carried the scent of blooming jasmine from planters along the sidewalk. Nathan hesitated as we prepared to go our separate ways, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his posture. I did love you, Elena, he said finally, echoing words he had offered the day he left. In my way. I know, I replied, the acknowledgement, neither bitter nor sentimental, simply truthful. And I loved you. But perhaps we loved different versions of each other, your vision of who I should be, my hope for who you might become. He nodded slowly, accepting this assessment without the defensiveness that would once have characterized his response to such direct observation. Good luck with Waterfall Estate, he said, extending his hand in a surprisingly formal gesture given our 15 years of intimacy. I hope it brings you joy. I accepted his handshake, the brief contact carrying finality rather than lingering attachment. Thank you, and good luck with your next steps, whatever they may be. As I walked to my car, I found myself reflecting on the curious symmetry of this encounter, a meal at the same restaurant where we had celebrated anniversaries and achievements throughout our marriage, now serving as the setting for a different kind of milestone. The mutual recognition of our permanent separation, not just legally, but emotionally. The weeks that followed unfolded with extraordinary momentum, as if the universe had aligned to facilitate my transition into this new chapter. The divorce settlement progressed smoothly through final approvals and court filings. Waterfall Estate passed inspection with only minor issues requiring attention, and my consulting work at PNW Creative Solutions quickly evolved from temporary arrangement to anticipated permanent position. 3 months to the day after Nathan had walked out of our Pearl District home, I stood on the stone terrace of Waterfall Estate, watching movers carry the last of my belongings into what was now officially my home. The afternoon sun filtered through ancient maple trees, casting dappled patterns across gardens that would soon reflect my own horticultural preferences rather than merely maintaining their previous design. Sophia appeared beside me, camera in hand as always, capturing this significant transition for posterity. It's really happening, she observed, her tone containing both excitement and a touch of awe. You've actually done it. It doesn't quite feel real yet, I admitted, watching as the moving truck departed down the winding driveway. I keep expecting someone to appear and explain there's been a terrible misunderstanding, that this life isn't actually mine to claim. Sophia lowered, her camera studying me with the penetrating gaze that had made her such a remarkable photographer. But that's exactly what makes this so powerful, Elena. This life is entirely yours to claim, shaped by your choices, your preferences, your vision. Not Nathan's, not anyone else's. Inside, the house waited to be transformed, not through extensive renovation, as its bones and character were already perfectly aligned with my aesthetic, but through the gradual process of inhabitation. Furniture arranged for comfort and conversation rather than impression management. Art selected for personal meaning rather than investment value. Spaces designed for living rather than display. The studio is perfect, Sophia declared as we wandered through the third-floor space where northern light streamed through skylights onto empty work tables awaiting creative projects. You can finally set up the design workspace you've always talked about. I ran my hand along a built-in cabinet that would soon house art supplies and design materials, imagining this space filled with the creative energy I had gradually suppressed during my marriage. I'm thinking of hosting community design workshops here, I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke it aloud. For youth from underserved neighborhoods, women re-entering the workforce, anyone who might benefit from creative skills development, but lacks access to traditional education channels. Sophia's expression brightened with genuine enthusiasm. That's perfect. Combining your design expertise with the community focus of your PNW work, all in this incredible space. She gestured expansively around the studio. From corporate wife to creative community builder. Now that's what I call a glow-up. I laughed at her characterization, though it contained more truth than hyperbole. In the months since Nathan's departure, my transformation had indeed been profound. Not just externally in my living situation and professional engagement, but internally in my relationship with my own desires and agency. Have you heard anything more about Nathan and Rebecca? Sophia asked as we made our way back downstairs to the kitchen where champagne awaited to celebrate this moving day. Grace mentioned they've reconciled professionally, I said, reaching for glasses from a recently unpacked box. Cascade ultimately maintained their investment in Mitchell Tech, but with additional oversight provisions. Personally. I shrugged. I haven't asked, and no one has volunteered information. The realization struck me with gentle force. I no longer monitored Nathan's life with the hypervigilance that had characterized our marriage and early separation. His choices, his relationship, his successes or struggles had gradually receded from the center of my awareness, becoming peripheral information rather than essential knowledge. You've really moved on, Sophia observed, her perception unnervingly accurate as always. I have, I acknowledged, the truth of it settling comfortably around me as I opened the champagne. Not just physically to this new home, but emotionally, to a place where Nathan's life is no longer central to my understanding of my own. We carried our glasses to the stone terrace, settling into Adirondack chairs I had purchased specifically for this space. Their comfortable, unpretentious design, perfectly complementing the natural beauty surrounding us. To Waterfall Estate, Sophia toasted, raising her glass. May it be the setting for the most extraordinary second act in divorce history. I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. 2 second acts, I agreed. And to remembering they're about our own stories, not reactions to someone else's. As evening gathered around us, the waterfall's gentle music providing perfect accompaniment to our conversation, I found myself filled with a quiet certainty that had been absent for longer than I could remember. The path ahead remained unmarked in many ways. New home, evolving career, relationships yet to be discovered or deepened. But it was undeniably, irrevocably mine. Nathan's departure, initially experienced as devastating rejection, had ultimately catalyzed a reclamation more profound than any I could have imagined when he first walked out our door. In losing the partnership I had shaped my life around, I had recovered something far more precious: myself. 1 year later, I stood in the same spot on my terrace, watching as guests arrived for Waterfall Estate's first community design workshop. Marcus and the PNW team had helped develop the curriculum, combining professional design principles with accessible applications for participants ranging from high school students to mid-career changers seeking new creative paths. The estate had transformed over the months of my residence, not through dramatic renovation, but through the gradual accumulation of choices made solely for my pleasure and purpose, rather than status or appearance. Gardens reflected my preference for wilder, more native plantings alongside the formal elements I'd maintained. Interiors balanced the home's historic character with comfortable, lived-in warmth that invited creativity and connection. Most significantly, I had transformed, not into someone new, but into a more authentic version of myself, gradually recovering aspects of my identity that had been set aside during 15 years of marriage to a man whose vision had eventually subsumed my own. My phone chimed with a text message from Sophia. "Running 10 minutes late. Don't start the inspiration speech without me." I smiled, tucking the phone back into my pocket as I continued greeting workshop participants. Among them was a familiar face I hadn't expected, Rebecca Wilson, looking somewhat hesitant as she approached the registration table. "Elna," she said, extending her hand with professional courtesy. "I hope it's all right that I registered." Olivia mentioned the workshop, and the focus on community design applications aligns with Cascade's initiatives. "Of course," I replied, genuinely meaning it. Whatever complicated history existed between us, it belonged to the past rather than the present moment. "Your venture capital perspective will be valuable to participants interested in the business applications of design thinking." Rebecca relaxed visibly, her professional composure softening slightly. "Thank you. And I've been meaning to say, what you've done with Waterfall Estate is remarkable. The integration of historic preservation with contemporary community purpose. It's exactly what this property needed." The compliment carried no undercurrent of comparison or competition, merely genuine appreciation from one professional to another. Something had shifted in Rebecca as well over the past year. A subtle maturing, perhaps, or simply the natural evolution that follows significant life experiences. "Nathan mentioned you've started your own investment fund focused on women-led ventures," I said, recalling a rare update that had reached me through our now minimal mutual connections. Rebecca nodded, a genuine smile emerging. "Yes, launching next quarter. It's been a challenging but rewarding pivot." She hesitated, then added with unexpected candor, "Sometimes the relationships that don't work out lead us toward the work that does." The insight, its relevance to both our journeys, created a moment of unexpected connection across what might otherwise have remained an awkward divide. As workshop participants gathered on the terrace where the day's activities would begin, I found myself surveying the scene with quiet satisfaction. Waterfall Estate, once coveted by Nathan as the ultimate status symbol, now transformed into a space for creativity, connection, and community contribution, stood as physical embodiment of my own transformation. Sophia arrived, slightly breathless, camera already capturing candid moments as participants mingled in the morning light. "Sorry I'm late," she said, joining me at the edge of the gathering. "But I have news you'll want to hear before you start." "What news?" I asked, making final notes for my welcome address. "Nathan's engaged," Sophia reported, watching closely for my reaction. "Not to Rebecca, to someone new, some tech investor. From Seattle he met at a conference 3 months ago." I absorbed this information with mild interest, but no emotional disruption. Nathan's romantic choices, once the center of my universe by their direct impact on my life, had become simply facts about someone I had once known intimately, but now observed from an appropriate distance. "I hope he's found someone who compliments him better than I did," I said sincerely, surprising Sophia with my genuine lack of rancor. "That's it? No satisfaction that Rebecca didn't last? No concern about potential new complications?" Sophia studied me with narrowed eyes. "Who are you and what have you done with my dramatically vindicated friend?" I laughed, recognizing the milestone this moment represented. The final evidence that I had truly moved beyond defining myself in relation to Nathan, either through accommodation or reaction. "I'm exactly who I've been becoming this past year," I replied. "Someone whose happiness doesn't depend on Nathan's choices, for better or worse." As I moved to the center of the terrace to welcome workshop participants to Waterfall Estate, I caught sight of my reflection in the French doors leading to the living room. The woman looking back at me appeared confident, purposeful, at home in her surroundings and herself, not defined by her former marriage or its dissolution, but by the choices she had made in reclaiming her own life. Welcome to Waterfall Estates. First Community Design Workshop, I began, my voice carrying easily across the attentive gathering. This home has a long history of creative expression, from its original craftsman architecture to its renowned gardens. Today, we begin writing a new chapter in that history together, one that explores how design thinking can empower communities and individuals to shape their own environments, tell their own stories, and ultimately, create their own futures. As sunlight sparkled through the waterfall that gave the estate its name, I felt the perfect symmetry of this moment. Standing on the grounds of a property I had chosen for myself, pursuing work I found meaningful, surrounded by a community, I was building through authentic connection rather than strategic calculation. The journey from Nathan's departure to this moment had been neither simple nor painless. But standing here now, I wouldn't have chosen any other path, for it was precisely that journey of loss and rediscovery that had led me back to myself, to the woman who had always existed beneath the accommodations and adjustments of 15 years of marriage. Not diminished by betrayal, but expanded by reclamation. Not defined by what had ended, but by what had finally, gloriously begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.